What if I told you that 1,000 years ago, in the middle of North America, there was a city larger than London, complete with plazas, temples, and a calendar aligned to the rising sun? This is the story of Cahokia, the Native American city that touched the sky. Tonight, you'll travel through its daily life, its hunts and feasts, its rituals and struggles, and by the end, you'll understand how it rose in greatness and why it disappeared. But stay with me, because the mystery of Cahokia's fall is a truth you don't want to miss. Drop a like on this video, and let's travel back 1,000 years. The city wakes before the sun. In the dim grey of dawn, the houses stand in quiet rows, their thatched roofs glistening with dew. Smoke drifts lazily from low openings in the roofs where embers have been kept alive through the night. Inside, families stir, stretching against the chill, warming their hands near the hearth. The walls are made of posts set deep into the earth, plastered with clay that smells faintly of last summer's grass. Floors are cool and packed hard from many seasons of feet passing across them. Hanging from rafters are gourds filled with seeds, bundles of dried herbs, and strings of fish glistening faintly with salt. In one house, a mother kneels at the fire pit, feeding it with last year's maize stalks. She grinds corn against a smooth stone, her body swaying in rhythm as her daughter sings softly beside her. A song learned from the grandmother, who now rests in the mound nearby. The sound is steady, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Outside, children chase one another between the houses, their laughter bouncing against clay walls. They fetch water from wells, carrying it carefully in pottery jars, whose patterns tell of families and hands long gone. Men step into the morning, carrying stone tools and wooden poles, ready to repair fences, raise posts, or hunt along the riverbanks. Dogs weave through the lanes, tails wagging, hoping for scraps of food. The air carries the smell of wood smoke, the sweetness of boiling maize, and the damp scent of earth after a night's mist. Birds stir in the trees beyond the wards, their calls answering the waking city. From every doorway, people emerge, stretching their arms toward the light that has not yet broken the horizon. For a moment, all eyes turn toward the open ground where tall wooden posts stand in a circle. There, the elders gather in silence. They wait for the sun to rise, to see if it will touch the place where they know it should. The people believe that the turning of the seasons lives in that circle of wood, that the earth and sky speak to one another through its shadows. The city hums with gentle movement, fires crackling, maize grinding, children laughing, but beneath it all is expectation. They are waiting, together, for the first light of day, and from the houses, feet soon turned toward the circle of posts that waited for the rising sun. The tall timbers stood in a wide ring on the edge of the plaza, each one set deep into the earth, weathered by seasons of wind and rain. They rose above the morning mist like a forest carefully planted by human hands, each trunk placed with purpose, each one a marker of time. The people called it their circle of the sun, for here they measured the years turning and the moments when the world was made new again. Elders had gathered before the first glow touched the horizon. Wrapped in cloaks against the cool air, they stood quietly, eyes fixed on the gap between two posts where the sun would appear. Beside them, children shuffled, hushed by parents who whispered that this was no ordinary morning, but one of many mornings tied together by the same path of light. The air was still, the city held its breath. In the hush, even the dogs sat silent, ears forward, as if they too knew something sacred was about to unfold. Then, slowly, the rim of the sun broke the horizon. A golden line spilled between the two posts, striking the center of the circle where a single great timber cast its shadow. A murmur moved through the gathered crowd, soft and reverent, as though the earth itself had spoken. The circle had proven itself again. The people were in step with the sky. Mothers touched their children's foreheads, a blessing to carry into the day. Farmers nodded to one another, knowing it was nearly time to walk to the fields. Storytellers whispered that the light was a reminder of beginnings, a promise renewed with each season. The old man who had stood watch longest let the breath he had held drift into the morning. His eyes moist not from age, but from gratitude. As the sun climbed higher, the circle filled with warmth. Birds began to sing, and the sound of the city resumed. Grinding stones, barking dogs, voices calling across the plaza. But in every home, in every field, the memory of that first line of light remained. A thread tying the people together with earth and sky. And when the sun broke between the tall posts, it called the city to its fields. When the light had passed through the circle of the sun, families gathered their baskets and walked toward the western edge of the city. Beyond the houses and the plaza stretched the wide floodplain, dark with fertile soil left by the rivers. Here lay the fields, ridged in careful rows, tended year after year until they had become the heart of the city's strength. The air smelled of damp earth, sweet and heavy. Dew clung to the leaves, and each step pressed water into the soil. Birds swooped low, calling across the furrows, searching for seeds or insects among the clods. Children followed their mothers and grandmothers, carrying gourds filled with kernels of maize. Each kernel saved from the last harvest, chosen carefully for size and color. These were not simply seeds, they were gifts from the ancestors, promises carried forward in every planting. At the edge of the first row, a woman knelt and pressed her hand into the soil. She whispered words of thanks, words taught to her by her mother, who had learnt them from her grandmother before her. Only then did she open her gourd and place 3 kernels into the small hollow she had made, covering them gently with soil. She smoothed the earth with her palm, leaving it even, as though tucking the seed into a bed. All around her, others did the same. Rows stretched out like lines on a woven mat, and along each line, hands moved with steady rhythm. Scoop, seed, cover, smooth. The sound of planting filled the morning. A soft patting of earth, the rustle of husks, the occasional song rising on the breeze. Some sang to lighten the work. Others sang to honor the corn itself. For maize was not just food, but life made visible. A little boy ran ahead, planting too quickly, tossing seeds without care. His grandmother laughed softly, guiding his small hand, teaching him to place each kernel with patience. Each seed is a traveler, she said. It will rise toward the sun, but only if it feels your care. The boy nodded solemnly, and together they pressed the earth flat over the seeds. Men worked nearby, using hoes of wood and stone to clear weeds from older rows, their bodies bent and shining with sweat. They called back and forth, voices cheerful, though their work was heavy. In one corner, a group of girls carried water from the river in clay pots, spilling a little as they hurried, laughing when the cold drops splashed their legs. By midday, the fields were alive with movement. The sun climbed high, warming the soil, while the breeze carried the scent of pollen from wildflowers at the edges of the fields. Families rested in the shade of willows, sharing roasted nuts and dried berries before returning to their rows. The planting went on, slow and steady, every seed a hope laid in the dark. At last, when the baskets were empty and the furrows closed, the people stood back and looked across the fields. What had been bare earth now held the secret of green life waiting to come. Children ran between the rows, arms outstretched like stalks already tall, and their laughter carried across the plain. The day had been long, but it was only the beginning. for the maize would not grow alone. Soon other seeds would join it, climbing its stalks, covering the ground, protecting it from the sun. And so, when the fields of maize were set in order, the people reached again for their baskets, this time filled with beans and squash. The beans were small and smooth, green and brown, like river stones polished by water. The squash seeds were pale and flat, light as feathers. Though different in form, they were meant to be companions, never growing alone. For the people knew that the three, maize, beans, and squash, were sisters, bound together by an old story, each one giving strength to the other. The women moved back into the rows, kneeling beside the newly planted mounds of maize. Into each mound, at the foot of the kernels, already sleeping in the earth, they pressed a single bean. The beans would wake later, after the maize had stretched toward the sun, and they would twine themselves around the tall green stalks, climbing higher day by day, wrapping gently as if in embrace. The stalks would give the beans a ladder, and the beans would give the stalks their gift, food drawn from the soil, unseen but strong. A little farther off, the squash seeds were set into the ground at the edges of the field. Children pressed them into the earth with small hands, laughing as the dry shells cracked between their fingers. These seeds would grow broad leaves that sprawled low, covering the soil like a blanket, keeping it cool, holding back the weeds. The squash would shelter her sisters just as surely as the stalks lifted and the beans climbed. The work was slower now, for the day was hot. The people sang as they worked, soft songs carried by the breeze across the plain. The words told of the sisters who loved one another so much that they could not live apart. One sister stood tall, one embraced, one guarded. Together they made the people strong. As the last seeds were placed, families sat in the grass, sharing bowls of cool water and roasted maize cakes. Children traced shapes in the dirt with their fingers, drawing stalks and leaves as they imagined them to be. Elders spoke of years past, when poor planting or sudden storms had thinned the harvest, and of other years when the sisters had grown so thick and heavy that pits overflowed with food. Every planting was a promise, but it was also a risk. Still, hope outweighed fear, as it always did. By evening, the work was done. The fields stretched outward in ridged rows, carrying within them the hidden sisters, waiting to rise. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft red, and the people walked back toward the city in a long, slow line. Baskets now empty, but hearts full. Dogs ran ahead, their shadows stretching long across the ground. At the edge of the fields, one girl turned and looked back. She whispered a good night to the seeds, a promise that she would return to watch them grow. The wind bent the grass as though answering her, and she smiled, running to catch up with her family. The city waited for them, fires being lit, smoke curling into the evening sky, the plaza beginning to fill with voices. And when the fields were set in order, baskets turned back toward the river. The river was the city's great road, wide and slow, glimmering in the evening light. It carried life just as surely as the fields did, for its waters gave fish, its banks gave reeds, and its currents carried traders from distant places. To walk down to the river was to step onto a path that led far beyond the horizon. Along the muddy shore, men pulled canoes up onto the bank. Some were heavy dugouts, carved from single logs, their sides dark and smooth from years of use. Others were lighter, long and narrow, swift enough to cut through the current. Children splashed in the shallows, chasing minnows, while women gathered reeds to dry and weave into mats. The fishermen returned first. They laid their catch on mats woven from willow, sturgeon with scales like armor, drumfish with silver bellies, and baskets of mussels pulled from the riverbed. Smoke from nearby fires rose into the air as fish were strung on racks to dry for the days ahead. Dogs circled eagerly, hoping for scraps, while gulls wheeled above, calling into the fading sky. Not long after, canoes from the south slid silently into the shallows. Their passengers carried baskets bound with cord and bundles wrapped in deerskin. When the wrappings were undone, treasures gleamed in the firelight. Copper beads hammered thin as leaves, sheets of mica that caught and reflected the flames, and shells shaped into ornaments from oceans far away. Children leaned close to see their glow, eyes wide, while elders nodded quietly, for they had seen such goods many times before. The river tied Cahokia, not just to its neighbors, but to lands hundreds of miles away. Trade was not only for treasure. From 𝒍𝒆𝒑 came salt, packed in clay jars. From villages downstream came woven cloth and carved stone pipes. Every canoe brought news as well. Stories of floods, hunts, births, and festivals. Traders carried words as much as goods, and when they spoke, people gathered close, listening to voices flavored with accents of faraway places. As the night deepened, fires burned along the riverbank. Families sat nearby, roasting fish, passing bowls of stew, telling stories to the sound of the flowing water. The river glowed faintly under the moon, its surface a shifting mirror of silver and shadow. Canoes rested on the bank, their prows pointed toward the current, ready for journeys yet to come. The people of Cahokia lay down to sleep with the river's voice in their ears, steady and endless, like a heartbeat echoing beneath the earth. For tomorrow, the river's gifts would be carried into the heart of the city. The plaza awaited these gifts, for by midday its wide earth would fill with people. At the center of the city stretched a great open square, larger than fields of ball games could ever cover, leveled flat by countless hands. Its packed earth gleamed in the sun, and from every lane and pathway, families made their way toward it. The plaza was where Cahokia's heart beat loudest. Here, people gathered not only to trade, but to feast, to speak, to play, to pray, and to watch the rising smoke of ceremonies that touched sky and earth together. In the early light, mats were spread across the ground, and baskets were placed upon them. A woman set down a jar of salt, its clay walls painted with spirals. Beside her, another woman laid out bundles of dried fish and smoked deer meat. A young boy carried gourds filled with sunflower seeds, which he poured into shallow wooden bowls that glimmered golden in the sun. Soon the plaza shimmered with colors. Red pottery, yellow maize, blue-gray stone tools, green gourds, and the polished white of shell beads. Children ran among the rows, laughing, tugging at their mothers' skirts, pointing at shiny objects that caught their eyes. A trader from the river unwrapped a bundle of copper sheets, thin as bark, which he had carried from far to the north. The metal glowed like fire, even in daylight, and a crowd pressed near, murmuring with awe. Another man lifted a piece of mica, clear and fragile, which reflected the faces that leaned toward it. Children gasped, as though it were a mirror to another world. The air was full of smells, roasting nuts, drying fish, crushed herbs, and earth baked warm by the sun. Voices wove together in a hum of bargaining and laughter. People exchanged not only goods but favors. A day's help in the fields for a basket of beans. A promise of firewood for a strand of beads. Nothing was wasted, for everything had its place and its value, measured not only in wealth but in kinship. At one corner of the plaza, a group of potters displayed their work. Bowls painted with red and black spirals stood beside jars incised with patterns of waves and feathers. One woman lifted a vessel that had taken her weeks to shape and fire. Its surface was smooth, its rim wide, its belly curved like the river. Children touched it with careful fingers, marveling at the weight and the coolness of the clay. The woman smiled gently, proud not only of her craft, but of the story each pot carried. Not far away, the sound of flutes floated into the air. Musicians sat in the shade, blowing soft notes from reeds, their songs mingling with the chatter of the crowd. A circle of dancers followed, feet moving in rhythm, feathers trembling in the light. Children clapped along, and elders tapped their canes to the beat. Music was as much an offering as food, a way of weaving joy into the day. In another space, storytellers gathered listeners close. One bent low to the ground, tracing lines in the dust as he spoke of rivers that carved the earth and of spirits who had shaped the mounds. The children leaned forward, eyes wide, while their parents listened with quiet respect. For stories were not only amusement but lessons, teaching how to live, how to plant, how to treat others with care. By midday, the plaza was alive with motion, a living tapestry of sound, scent, and color. The walls of the great mound cast long shadows over the crowd, and everyone knew that soon the leaders would emerge, their voices carrying across the square. But for now, the marketplace was the people's own, a place where every hand contributed and every voice found a home. As the hum of trade softened, another sound began to rise, the deep, steady beat of drums. People looked toward the mound, their talk falling quiet. The air itself seemed to wait, as though the earth held its breath for what was to come. And as the drums began to sound across the square, all eyes turned toward the great mound. The sound was slow at first, deep and steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Each beat rolled across the plaza, echoing against the packed earth, settling into the bodies of those who listened. Children grew still, their laughter fading into silence. Men lowered the tools in their hands. Women paused, holding bowls close to their chests. The drums gathered them all into one great breath. From the wide stairway carved into the side of the mound, figures appeared. They moved slowly, their cloaks of feathers and woven cloth stirring in the breeze. At their head walked the speaker, the one whose voice carried both counsel and command. Behind him followed elders of the clans, women and men chosen for wisdom and for care of the people. When they reached the broad platform halfway up the mound, they stood together, gazing down upon the square. The speaker lifted his staff, carved from cedar, tipped with copper that glinted in the sun. At once the drums ceased, and the silence deepened. Then the voice came, measured, calm, and clear. It told of the planting that had begun that morning, of the seeds lying safe in the dark earth, waiting for the rain. It spoke of hunters who had brought back deer and turkeys, of fishermen whose nets had been filled, of traders whose canoes had returned heavy with goods. It reminded the people of the harmony between their labor and the gifts of the world. At times the voice grew stern, speaking of duties not yet done, walls to be strengthened, water to be carried, children to be taught. But always it returned to gratitude, weaving thanks into every word. Gratitude to the fields, to the rivers, to the sky, and to the ancestors who had shown them the way. The people listened, heads bowed, hearts steady. Some closed their eyes and let the words wash over them like cool water. Others nodded gently, agreeing with the counsel given. Even the children, though restless, understood the weight of the moment, for they had heard such words since their earliest days. When the speech ended, the drums began again. Not slow this time, but lively, pulsing with energy. Dancers stepped into the open, feathers flashing, shells rattling, feet stamping in rhythm. The plaza filled with movement and song. Voices rose in call and answer, carrying joy across the square. From the edges of the plaza, women brought forward great pots of food. They set them on mats, ladles ready, steam rising into the air. The scents drifted over the crowd, rich stews of maize and beans, roasted fish, squash baked until its flesh was soft and sweet. Clay cups were filled with drinks brewed from persimmons and honey. The people formed lines, each family taking what they needed, no more, no less, for the feast was meant for all. Children laughed as they balanced bowls too large for their hands. Elders were given the first portions, their bowls filled deep as a sign of respect. Neighbors passed food across mats, sharing with those who had less. Even strangers, newly arrived with trade goods, were offered bowls, for the feast bound everyone together, no matter where they had come from. The plaza became a sea of voices, of clinking bowls, of gentle laughter. Stories flowed as freely as the food. Some spoke of hunts, others of dreams, others of journeys far down river. Every tale was part of the feast, as nourishing as the stew itself. As the sun sank lower, the drums softened once more, until only a gentle rhythm remained. The people ate their fill, resting on the ground, their bellies warm, their spirits light. Children leaned against their parents, half asleep from food and music. Elders closed their eyes, smiling faintly, and when the last bowls were emptied, when the drums faded into silence, all eyes turned again to the great mound, where the fire atop its summit burned bright against the dusk. It was there that the people saw their leaders once more, standing in the glow, hands raised in blessing. The fire crackled, sparks rising into the evening sky. The people felt its warmth across the plaza, carrying with it the promise of safety, of plenty, of unity. And as the voices quieted, the people moved once more to the city's edge, where walls were rising. But above those walls, higher even than the rooftops of the wards, stood the mound, the great mound of Cahokia. It rose like a mountain made by human hands, its sides built from layer upon layer of earth carried in baskets, each one poured and packed by men, women, and children whose names were now part of the soil itself. The mound did not climb with sharp edges, instead, it rose in broad terraces, for great steps leading upward, each one wide enough to hold gatherings of people. At its summit lay a flat crown, large enough to hold a temple, a council house, and a fire whose light could be seen for miles. From below, the mound looked eternal, as if it had always been there. Its bulk seemed to anchor the city, drawing the eye from every corner of the plaza. Some said it was the spine of the earth itself, a place where sky and soil touched. Others said it was a bridge for voices, carrying prayers upward and bringing blessings downward. Whatever the words, all agreed that the mound was alive with memory. Families walking home from the feast often paused to gaze at it. Children asked how it was made, and parents told them the old stories of ancestors who carried baskets of dirt day after day, season after season, until the hill rose higher than any tree. Some whispered that every basket had been a gift of love, poured onto the earth to build a place where the people could stand together. On its broad terraces, workers were often seen. They smoothed the slopes, cut away weeds, and repaired the packed earth so rain would not wash it down. Paths wound upward, gentle enough for the old and the young to climb, though few went to the top without purpose. To stand on that height was not for idle wandering. It was for ceremony, for council, for moments when the city must face itself. At the summit, the temple stood, its posts thick, its roof thatched and tall. The walls were painted in bright colors that caught the sun. Beside it stood a council house, smaller but no less important, where leaders gathered to speak of the city's needs. And at the very center burned a fire, never left to die, its smoke spiraling into the sky as though tying the people below to the stars above. From that height, The view stretched across the floodplain. To the west lay the river, shining like a silver ribbon. To the east rose the smaller mounds and the houses of the wards, clustered together like beads on a cord. Beyond them stretched the dark green of forests and the golden swells of fields. To stand there was to see not only the city but the world as the people knew it. On feast days, leaders would climb the mound with measured steps. The people below would lift their eyes, waiting. When the leaders appeared on the summit, their voices carried across the plaza, as if the air itself wished to bear their words. Drums answered from below, flutes joined, and the sound washed over the city like a tide. At night, when the fire at the summit burned bright, its glow lit the plaza, casting long shadows across the packed earth. Families resting in their houses looked out at its flicker and felt safe. The Mound's fire was more than flame. It was a promise that the city would endure through storm, through hunger, through time itself. And so, the Great Mound was not only earth piled high, it was memory, labor, prayer, and watchfulness, all bound into one. It was the city's heart raised to the sky. When the voices from the mound fell silent, the people turned back to their homes. But beyond those homes, at the city's edge, the wall was waiting to be built. The city has shown itself in pieces, like a tapestry slowly unrolled. Each thread we have followed leads to another, until together they weave a picture of life in. We began in the quiet of morning, when the houses stirred and smoke curled upward from low fires. We heard the soft grinding of maize on stone, the laughter of children fetching water, the call of birds greeting the dawn. We walked the lanes of the wards, where homes stood shoulder to shoulder, walls of clay and wood holding the warmth of families within. In those simple moments, fires tended, food prepared, seeds carried, we saw the rhythm of daily life, steady as a heartbeat. From there, our steps turned toward the circle of the sun. Do you remember the silence as the people gathered? The posts standing tall in their ring, the breathless hush before the light broke the horizon, the old man watching, the children leaning forward, the city waiting together for the golden line of day. The circle proved again what the people already knew, that their lives were bound to the sky, that the world turned with them, season after season, promise after promise. When the light came, it led us to the fields. Their hands pressed kernels of maize into the dark soil, each seed placed with care, each mound smoothed with love. The fields were not only earth but hope, the hope that maize would rise tall, that beans would twine, that squash would spread her sheltering leaves. Together, the three sisters whispered of balance and kinship, each one giving what the others lacked, just as people gave to one another in work and in play. Do you remember the boy planting too quickly, corrected by the gentle hand of his grandmother? The girl who whispered good night to the seeds, promising to return. These were not only chores of farming, they were lessons in patience, in care, in belonging. The fields taught as much as they fed. From the fields, our baskets turned back to the river. There, we saw canoes sliding through the current, bringing fish, salt, shells, copper, mica, treasures from near and far. We watched the fishermen spread their catches on mats, heard the gulls call overhead, smelled the smoke of drying fish. The river was not only a giver of food, but a road of stories. Traders carried not only goods, but words, news of floods, of hunts, of distant festivals. The city's veins pulsed with those waters, tying Cahokia to places beyond sight. And when the river's gifts were carried into the heart of the city, the plaza awoke. We saw the marketplace fill with color and sound, pots painted with spirals, gourds gleaming golden, beads strung like tiny stars. We heard the music of flutes, the rattle of shells, the steady beat of feet on packed earth. Children ran, Elders watched, storytellers bent low to draw lines in the dust. In that square, the city gathered itself, family beside family, ward beside ward, stranger beside friend. When the drums called, all eyes lifted to the great mound. Leaders spoke, their words weaving gratitude and counsel together, reminding the people of their duties and their blessings. Then came the feast, bowls of maize and beans, roasted fish, baked squash, sweet persimmon drink. Laughter rose with the steam, neighbors sharing with neighbors, even strangers welcomed as kin. For in Cahokia, food was more than nourishment. It was a binding thread, drawing everyone into one circle of belonging. At last, the mound itself came into view. Do you remember its terraces rising, its summit crowned with temple, council house, and the fire that never slept? Do you remember how the people spoke of it, as earth piled high with memory, as a bridge between sky and soil, as a place where voices could be heard across the world? The mound was not only a monument, it was a promise, built basket by basket, carried on the backs of countless ancestors. It was the city's heart raised to the heavens. And so we pause here, at the edge of the great mound, with the glow of its fire warming the night. We pause to remember what has already been shown, the waking of houses, the silence of the circle, the planting of fields, the songs of the river, the hum of the marketplace, the feast on the plaza, the rise of the mound. These are the threads that hold Cahokia together, threads of earth and water, of fire and sky, of labor and laughter, of story and song. But the city is not only built of plazas and mounds, it also protects itself, for with greatness comes need. Beyond the houses, at the far edge of Cahokia, lines of timber are rising, tall posts set deep into the earth. Workers strain against their weight, children carry water to cool the sweat, voices call out in rhythm as each post is lifted upright. The wall is growing, and with it, the city tightens its circle to stay whole. And so, as the fire on the great mound flickers into the night, the sound of axes and hammers carries from the edge of the city, where the palisade waits to be raised. At the outer rim of Cahokia, the earth is marked with long trenches, freshly cut, running in great lines that bend and turn at right angles. Into these trenches, the people lower the trunks of tall trees, straight as spears, bark stripped away, ends sharpened. They stand shoulder to shoulder in the soil, forming a wall of wood that stretches farther than the eye can see. At the corners, the wall swells outward into strongholds shaped like clenched fists. These are the bastions, where archers may stand watch, where the city may see and defend itself. The work is heavy, but it is shared. Men lean their shoulders against the trunks, lifting, guiding, and steadying each pole until it drops into place with a deep, earthen thud. Women stand nearby with baskets of clay and soil, filling the gaps at the base, packing the earth firm so the posts will not lean. Children carry water in clay jars, setting them down where the workers pause, their laughter mingling with the rhythm of the labor. The tools are simple, yet they serve well. Axes of stone lashed to wooden handles, mallets of hardwood, wedges carved from antler and bone. The sound of chopping echoes across the fields, a steady beat that joins with the calls of birds in the trees. Every blow is a promise of safety, every thud a reminder of the city's strength. This is not the first wall the people have built, nor will it be the last. Each generation renews it, pulling down what has rotted, raising new posts in its place. The palisade grows and shifts, bending to the needs of the city, just as the river bends through its floodplain. 4 times, perhaps more, the wall has been rebuilt, each time enclosing the heart of Cahokia more tightly. Within its circle lie the plaza, the mounds, the great houses, and the memory of all who came before. As the wall rises, the city seems to draw inward, as if gathering itself like a cloak pulled close against the wind. From the top of the bastions, one can look down across the houses and fields. See the river winding silver in the distance. See the smoke of cooking fires curling toward the sky. The palisade is more than protection. It is a boundary, a line that tells where the city begins, where its people hold together. And when the work pauses, when the men lower their tools and the women wipe the earth from their hands, there is a moment of silence. In that silence, they look upon what they have made. A wall of timber, rooted deep in the earth, standing tall against the horizon. A wall that says, "Here is our home. Here is our people. Here is the place where life gathers." The children play in the shadow of the posts, darting between them like sparrows, their laughter rising above the tired breaths of their elders. For them, the wall is not only defense, but wonder. A forest of wood where once there was none, a shape of the city they will inherit. And beyond the wall, when the work of day is done, another kind of play is waiting. The rolling of a stone across the open ground, and the chase that follows. But before play, the children still have their share of work. In the shadow of the new posts, they scurry back and forth, carrying small baskets of soil to pack into the trenches where the great timbers stand. Their hands are quick, though the baskets are light. Some fetch stones to wedge the bases, others bring cool water from jars to quench the thirst of their fathers and mothers. One boy follows close behind the workers, patting the earth firmly with his bare feet, proud of the role he plays. His sister teases him, laughing, but she too leans into the work, pressing clay into the gaps until the posts hold steady. For children at Cahokia, work and play are braided together. They learn by doing, helping with tasks too small for grown hands, watching and copying the movements of their elders. What begins as a game becomes a lesson, and what begins as a lesson often ends in laughter. The wall itself teaches them. Its height, its weight, its purpose. It tells them that they belong to something greater, something worth building and protecting. When the last post of the day is set and the earth is packed firm, the workers stretch their tired arms. The children cheer, proud of the wall that now towers over them. And then, as often happens, someone brings out the smooth, discoidal stone. It is heavy, shaped carefully by old hands, its edges rounded from years of play. The game of chunky is about to begin. The open plaza beyond the wall becomes their field. A man steps forward, the stone balanced against his palm. The crowd gathers, men and women, children and elders, all eager to watch. With a strong stride, he rolls the stone across the ground. It hums as it moves, a faint worry sound, gliding true and straight. Dust rises beneath its path, sunlight glinting off its polished edge. Two players sprint after it, spears in their hands. Their eyes fix on the rolling stone, measuring its speed, its wobble, its final fall. Each man casts his spear, calling his guess for where it will come to rest. One spear bites the earth just ahead of the stone. The other skims its side as it slows and tips onto its edge. The crowd shouts in delight, some clapping, others laughing at the near miss. The game repeats again and again. The stone rolls, the spears fly, wagers are made. Shell beads, tools, and small favors pass from hand to hand. Even children join in, tossing sticks instead of spears, running and tripping, their laughter carrying high above the steady rhythm of play. For Cahokia, chunky is not only sport but ceremony, a way of binding the city together. Victories bring pride, losses bring lessons, and every roll of the stone reminds the people that life, too, is a chase whose end is unseen until the very last moment. As the sun lowers and the air cools, the players grow weary. The stone is lifted one final time and placed carefully upon a mat to rest until tomorrow. The crowd disperses, drifting back toward the houses where fires already smoke in the doorways. Children skip ahead, still laughing, spears of willow clutched in their hands. Elders walk more slowly, leaning on canes, remembering games played in their own youth. The plaza, once filled with shouts and cheers, grows quiet again. Only the faint echo of the game lingers, fading into the evening air. And when the cheers faded, families drifted homeward, toward the glow of hearths and the promise of evening fires. The lanes of Cahokia grew calm as the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched long across the packed earth, and the walls of houses turned golden in the last light of day. Smoke rose once more from the roof openings, curling skyward in pale ribbons, carrying with it the scent of cooking food. Inside each home, the hearth was the center. Its shallow pit glowed with coals, kept alive since morning, now fed with fresh sticks of willow and oak. Women stirred clay pots balanced on tripods of stone, the contents bubbling slowly. The smell of maize bread baking on flat stones mingled with the rich aroma of stews. Beans thickened with squash, fish simmered with herbs gathered from the river's edge. Venison roasted until the fat sizzled. Children, tired from their play, huddled close to the fire, hands outstretched toward its warmth. Some picked at pieces of dried fruit or nibbled roasted nuts, unable to wait for the meal. Dogs lay at the doorway, ears flicking at the sound of voices outside, tails thumping softly when scraps were tossed their way. The houses themselves, round or rectangular, were small but full of life. Their walls of woven posts and clay kept the night wind at bay, while rafters above held bundles of dried food, baskets of seeds, and the tools of daily work. Near the fire, mats were spread where families sat together, their shadows flickering against the plastered walls. As bowls were passed around, the chatter of the day began. A father told of the wall he had helped raise, his hands still rough with splinters. A mother reminded her children of the songs sung in the fields, urging them to remember the words. Older siblings teased the younger ones about their wild throws in the chunky game, laughter rising over the crackle of the fire. Elders spoke more softly, their voices carrying memory. They told of times when floods had swallowed the fields, or when the harvest had been so great that pits could not hold all the maize. They spoke of journeys along the river, of traders met and treasures seen. Their words were not only stories but lessons, reminders carried from one generation to the next. Outside, the night deepened. Crickets began their steady chorus. The air cooled, scented with the sweetness of wildflowers that opened only in the dark. Above, stars appeared, first one, then many, until the sky was thick with them. Through the smoke hole, families could look upward and see the lights of the heavens, as if ancestors were watching from far above. One by one, meals came to an end. Bowls were rinsed and set aside, mats were rolled out for sleeping. Children curled close to their parents, heavy-eyed, their bellies full. The fire dimmed, banked with ash, to keep it alive until morning. Within the houses, quiet settled, broken only by the occasional stir of a dreamer or the soft call of an infant. And as bellies filled and the day's work faded, eyes lifted once more toward the sky, where the stars had begun their slow dance. And as bellies filled, eyes lifted toward the deepening sky, where stories of the heavens waited to be told. The city grows quiet now. The laughter of the chunky game has faded. The clang of tools is gone, and only the low murmur of fires remains. The people of Cahokia have returned to their homes, each family gathered close around the warmth of a hearth. The smell of roasted venison, of maize bread, of herbs steeped in hot water still lingers in the air. Dogs curl at doorways, children rest with heavy eyes, elders breathe steady, their voices falling into silence. We have walked with them through the day, through the smoke of morning fires, through the circle of the sun, through the fields where the sisters were planted. We have followed the baskets to the river, watched the canoes glide home with treasures from far-off lands, and stepped into the hum of the marketplace, where beads and stories passed from hand to hand. We have stood in the shadow of the great mound, listened to the council's words, joined in the feast. We have felt the strain of raising posts at the city's edge, and the joy of children running free in the game of chunky. At last, we have entered the hearths of evening, the glow of fires on clay walls, the taste of food shared, the rhythm of families resting together. So much of life has already unfolded, yet this city is far from still. Beyond the walls, the river flows on. Beneath the soil, seeds stir, and above, the sky has opened, vast and endless, filled with lights that the people know as kin. For in Cahokia, the heavens are not silent. They are storytellers themselves, a tapestry of ancestors and spirits stretched across the dark. Tonight, when the embers glow low and children drift into dreams, voices will rise again, not in the plaza, not on the mound, but in the homes themselves. Stories of the sky will be told, of hunters who chase forever among the stars, of the moon who walks her own bright path, of spirits who guide the people through darkness and into dawn. These tales are not only for wonder, but for teaching, reminding each generation that the world above and the world below are bound together. And so, as Cahokia sleeps, let us pause at this threshold between the day just ended and the night now beginning. Let us hold in our hearts the warmth of the fire, the fullness of the feast, the laughter of games, and the strength of walls newly raised. Let us wait, for in the hush of night the stars are ready to speak, and while the children dreamed, some still kept vigil with the ancestors written in the sky. Above Cahokia, the heavens stretched wide and clear. Stars shimmered like scattered beads, countless points of light strung across the dark. To the people, these were not silent fires, but living beings, ancestors, animals, and spirits who moved through the night, guiding, warning, and reminding. Each star carried a story, and each story carried a lesson. In one house, a grandmother sat near the hearth, her face lit by the last glow of embers. Around her, children lay wrapped in woven blankets, their eyes heavy but still open, waiting. With a voice low and steady, she began to speak, not to pass the time, but to carry on the words her own grandmother had given her long ago. She told of the hunters in the sky, great figures who chased their quarry across the heavens. Some called them deer, others bear, but always the hunters ran, with spears lifted, their breath seen in the frosty shimmer of the stars. The children's eyes lifted upward through the smoke hole, searching for the shining line of the chase. "See there," the grandmother whispered, pointing with a finger worn smooth by age. "The one that leads them forward, bright and steady, never falling. He is the hunter's torch, and those behind, in a row, are the spears that never miss. When you see them rise in the east, you know the time of planting has come. When they climb high, the fields are growing strong, and when they fade in the west, the harvest is near." The children listened, the rhythm of her words sinking deep. For these stories were not only tales, they were calendars, maps written in the sky. By watching the hunters, the people knew when to sow, when to tend, when to gather. The stars told them the order of the world, and the stories ensured that even the youngest would remember. Outside, others kept watch as well. Hunters, returning late from the woods, paused to read the heavens, measuring their path by constellations. Elders leaned on their canes and traced shapes with slow hands, sharing what each cluster meant. Even those who stood guard at the palisade looked upward, comforted by the familiar patterns overhead. The sky was a companion to all, as constant as the earth beneath their feet. The grandmother's voice softened as she spoke of the hunter's endless chase. "They run still," she said, "though the deer is swift, and the hunters never tire. Some day, perhaps, they will catch their prey, but not in our time, nor in our children's, nor in their children's after them." And so they remind us that life, too, is a pursuit. We chase the harvest, we chase wisdom, we chase the days given to us. The chase itself is the gift. The children sighed, their eyes closing now, their dreams already reaching toward the sky. The grandmother leaned back, the fire dimming, the stars above burning on without end. And while the hunters kept their chase across the heavens, the moon began her own slow walk, lighting another path in the night. She rose pale and round over the trees, her glow spilling like water across the rooftops of Cahokia. The smoke drifting from the houses caught her light, and for a moment the city itself seemed wrapped in silver. Where the stars glittered sharp and far, the moon was close, soft and watchful. A lantern hung low in the sky. The people of Cahokia looked to her not only for beauty, but for guidance. Her face told them when to plant and when to harvest, when to fast and when to feast. Each night she changed, just a little, and in her changes the people read the order of time. A thin crescent meant beginnings, a swelling half meant growth, and the round full moon meant fullness, when seeds should be strong in the ground or the harvest gathered home. When she waned, food was stored away, fires banked, and people waited for the cycle to begin again. In one house, children lay awake, staring through the smoke hole at her glowing face. Their mother traced the arc of the sky with her hand. "She walks a long road," she whispered, "from the river's edge to the far hills, from one season to the next. She walks so we may walk. She shows us that every ending is only a turning, and every turning leads to a new beginning." The children asked why her face sometimes grew thin, as though she were wasting away. Their mother smiled and told them the old story, that the moon carried a basket of light, and each night she gave a little of it away to the world below. When her basket was empty, she rested in darkness, but soon enough she would return, her basket filled again. "So we do not fear the dark nights," she said. "They are only her time of rest." Outside, the plaza lay quiet beneath her glow. The great mound rose like a sleeping giant, its summit fire faint beside the silver lantern of the sky. The palisade posts cast long shadows, stretching like black fingers across the earth. Hunters returning late followed her light along the riverbanks. Watchers at the bastions kept her close in their thoughts, for her brightness revealed what might otherwise move unseen. In the fields, the moon's glow touched the newly planted rows. Tiny shoots of maize had not yet broken the soil, but the people believed they felt her warmth even in the earth. Her silver light was a blessing, a sign that the sisters were never truly alone in the dark. Elders often told that the moon was a woman who walked her own path, apart from the sun, yet never without him. By day he ruled with fire and heat, giving life and strength. By night she ruled with gentleness, guiding dreams, guarding travelers, and lighting the way for stories. Together they turned the world, each one carrying what the other could not. And so, on nights like this, stories were told by her light. Grandmothers spoke of journeys across rivers of stars, of lovers separated by the sky, of warriors who found rest in her glow. Children listened with wide eyes until their lids grew heavy, and the moon herself seemed to rock them to sleep with her slow and steady climb. As the night stretched on, the city settled deeper into rest. The stars wheeled overhead, the hunters still in pursuit, the moon still walking her bright path. In time, even the last voices grew quiet. Fires sank into embers. Dogs curled tighter at the doors. The only sound was the soft rush of the river and the whisper of wind against the palisade. Above it all, the moon carried on, tireless, her path steady, her glow unbroken. She watched the city as a mother watches her sleeping children, holding them close in light even as they dreamed. And while the children dreamed of hunters and moons, others looked toward the burial mounds, where ancestors rested and the city's memory was kept alive. By day, the mounds rose gently above the plain. Some small, round as sleeping hills, others long and narrow, still others built wide and tall. By night, they became quiet shadows, resting places where fireflies flickered like the souls of those who had gone before. These were not places of fear, but of closeness. To the people of Cahokia, the dead had not vanished. They had only moved into another world that ran alongside this one, a world that could be reached through ceremony, through offering, through the whisper of prayers carried in smoke. Some mounds held entire families, buried with beads, tools, and vessels, so they would not walk into the next life empty-handed. Others held the remains of leaders, their graves marked with copper, mica, and rare shells brought from far-off shores. Still others, especially near the Grand Plaza, were communal resting places. Mounds built layer upon layer over many seasons, each new burial adding to the earth, each new ceremony binding the living more tightly to the dead. Archaeologists today have uncovered what Cahokians knew in their hearts. That burial was not only a duty, but a way of tying the city together. In one mound, the dead were arranged carefully in circles, as though gathered in eternal council. In another, young women were laid side by side, their bodies adorned with shell beads numbering in the tens of thousands, their presence both sacred and mysterious. In still others, ordinary people rested with pots of food, tools of stone, and ornaments of clay, simple gifts, yet full of meaning, for they were tokens of love and remembrance. Ceremonies at the mounds often began with fire. A blaze was kindled, and prayers were spoken into its rising smoke. Food was placed on mats, maize bread, roasted meat, bowls of beans, so that the ancestors might share in the feast. Sometimes songs were sung, low and steady, reminding the people that death was not an ending but a turning, like the moon's path above. Children were always brought to the mounds, to learn early that life and death were woven together. They touched the packed earth, were told the names of those beneath, and were taught to greet them as family. These are your grandmothers, a mother might say, pointing to a low mound. These are your uncles, your cousins, your kin. They are not gone. They walk with us still. In this way, the children grew up, never fearing the mounds, but loving them as homes of memory. The mounds also reminded the people of responsibility. Just as the ancestors had once raised houses, carried baskets of earth, planted the fields, and built the mounds themselves, so too must the living continue the work. Each visit was both remembrance and promise, a pledge to carry the same burdens, to show the same care, to leave the same strength for those yet to come. At night, the mounds seemed alive. The glow of fires lit on their slopes shone faintly against the sky. Families gathered at their bases, telling stories of the ones who rested within, while elders lifted flutes and drums to send music upward. The sound drifted into the dark, as if the ancestors themselves might join in the song. Sometimes, when the moon was full and the plaza silent, people said they felt a presence at the mounds. A cool breeze, a sudden hush of insects, the sense of being watched with love rather than fear. In those moments, the line between living and dead seemed thin, as if one could almost hear the voices of grandmothers and grandfathers speaking just beyond the veil of night. And so, to rest with the ancestors was not to be forgotten. It was to be carried forward by stories, by offerings, by the very earth piled high over each grave. The mounds themselves were proof, monuments built not of stone, but of memory, faith, and endless hands that had worked together to keep the past alive. The city of Cahokia was never truly alone. Beneath its soil, its kin still lay, keeping watch, shaping dreams, guiding the steps of the living. And even as they honored the old ones, the city prepared for the next day's rhythm, for work would begin anew with the dawn. The morning mist rose again from the river, curling through the lanes of Cahokia. Dew clung to the grasses, sparkling in the first rays of sunlight, and the fields stretched wide with promise. The great mound watched over it all, its shadow long across the plaza. Life in the city did not pause for long. The rhythm of tasks and play carried the people forward, just as steady as the turning of the sky. Families stepped from their houses, carrying tools and baskets. Women returned to the fields, hoes of wood and stone in their hands. They weeded the young rows of maize, their bodies bending and straightening in rhythm. Children followed close, scattering along the edges of the fields to chase away birds or gather wild greens. Sometimes the smallest ones simply sat on the mounds of earth, watching their mothers work, playing with the soil in their hands, already learning the feel of the land. Men carried nets down to the river. Some waded into the shallows to scoop mussels. Others cast lines baited with bits of bone or fat, while a few pushed canoes into deeper waters, where sturgeon swam thick and heavy. The river was generous, but it also demanded respect. One misstep, one overturned canoe, and its currents could sweep a life away. Still, the people moved with confidence, for the river had always been their teacher. Back within the city, craftspeople set to their labors. Potters shaped new vessels, their hands wet with clay gathered from the banks. They smoothed the rims with bone tools, pressed patterns into the walls, and left them in the sun to dry before the firing. Basket weavers split reeds and river cane, their fingers working quickly, plating fibers into storage containers strong enough to hold the coming harvest. Stoneworkers chipped away at flint, sparks flying as new blades and arrowheads took form. The steady tap-tap of their tools carried through the wards, as constant as the call of birds overhead. In the plaza, the younger ones gathered once more. After small chores were done, fetching water, sweeping doorways, carrying firewood, they were free to play. Some chased each other in races across the open ground, bare feet kicking up dust. Others practiced throwing spears at targets of straw, mimicking the hunts they had watched their fathers lead. The game of chunky, too, was played again, though with smaller stones and shorter spears, a child's imitation of the great contests that stirred the crowd. Their laughter rose, carrying joy across the city, a sound as vital as any tool or harvest. The balance of work and play was not accidental. The children learned their duties through games, their games shaped to mirror the world of the grown. A boys' race across the plaza was also practiced for the chase of deer. A girl's weaving of grasses was the first step toward the great mats and baskets her hands would one day make. In this way, the city's rhythm carried even the smallest forward, preparing them for the years ahead. By midday, the air grew warm. Families paused their work to share simple meals, flat cakes of maize, dried berries, roasted nuts, or fish freshly caught. They sat in small circles, resting in the shade of trees, telling small stories to pass the time. the laughter of children, the murmur of adults, the hum of cicadas, all blended into one steady chorus, the living voice of Cahokia. When the meal was finished, some returned to labor. Others gathered in the plaza for contests of strength. Wrestling matches drew crowds, the young men grappling in the dust, while onlookers cheered and clapped. In one corner, elders taught songs to groups of children, their voices slow and steady, the words carrying the lessons of planting, of gratitude, of respect for earth and sky. These songs, sung in rhythm, were as important as the work itself, for they bound memory to melody and ensured it would not be forgotten. As the sun lowered, the city once again quieted. Families walked home, baskets filled with herbs, reeds, or fish to prepare for evening meals. Children, tired from both chores and games, followed slowly, dragging sticks in the dirt or carrying treasures. A feather, a shell, a smooth stone, gathered during the day. The plaza emptied, but its dust still held the marks of play, the footprints of laughter. The city of Cahokia moved like this every day. Work woven with play, duty woven with joy. Each task strengthened the people. Each game prepared the next generation. In the turning of a single day, the whole rhythm of life could be seen. Food gathered, tools made, children taught, stories sung, ancestors remembered. But beyond the plaza, the forest called with its own tasks, for the hunt was waiting in the shadows of the trees. At the edge of Cahokia, where fields gave way to thickets of willow and oak, hunters gathered in the cool of morning. Their bodies were painted with clay and ash, marks of focus and protection. They carried bows of strong wood, their strings woven tight from sinew, and quivers filled with flint-tipped arrows chipped sharp as teeth. Some bore spears, their shafts polished smooth, their points tied fast with deer hide. Others carried nets, for not every hunt was of the bow. Sometimes the chase ended with the sudden closing of woven cords, thrown wide to trap the quarry within. The dogs came too, lean and eager, their noses twitching at the scents carried on the breeze. They padded quietly at the hunter's heels, trained to flush deer from cover or corner, smaller game. Their presence was as old as the people's memory, companions in both hunt and hearth. The hunters moved silently, their steps practiced, their eyes keen. They knew the paths of deer, the calls of birds, the rustle of squirrels in the branches. The forest was not wilderness to them, it was a map, read through broken twigs, hoofprints pressed into mud, and feathers caught on bark. Each sound told a story. A turkey scratching for insects, a raccoon slipping into water, a herd of deer grazing in the distance. They spread out, some circling wide, others moving in pairs. The dogs darted ahead, pausing, waiting for hand signals. The hunters' breaths were low, steady, their hearts calm. To hunt was not simply to take life. It was to move in rhythm with the forest, to honor the gift that would come. Soon, a boy, new to the hunt, though not to its lessons, spotted the first sign. A patch of bent grass where hooves had passed, fresh droppings still moist. He motioned to the elder beside him, who nodded silently. They followed the trail deeper into the woods, where shafts of light fell in golden streams through the canopy. The deer appeared at last, a small group grazing at the edge of a clearing. Their ears twitched, their tails flicked, but they had not yet sensed danger. The hunters froze, every muscle still. Time seemed to slow, the forest holding its breath. Then, with a single motion, the bows were raised. Arrows flew, whistling softly through the air. One struck true. A deer staggered, then fell, its body stilling in the grass. The others bounded away, white tails flashing as they disappeared into shadow. The dogs gave chase, but were quickly called back. The hunters gathered, their faces solemn, their voices quiet. The elder knelt beside the fallen animal. He placed his hand upon its neck, whispered words of thanks, and sprinkled a pinch of maize flour onto the ground. The gift of life was never taken lightly. The deer would feed families, its hide would clothe them, its bones and sinews would become tools. Nothing would be wasted, for to waste was to dishonor. The younger hunters watched closely, learning not only the skills of the hunt, but the spirit of it. They saw that the forest gave only to those who remembered respect. They understood that each arrow carried more than a point. It carried gratitude, duty, and the promise of balance. With careful hands, the hunters dressed the animal, dividing the weight among them for the journey home. The dogs circled, tails wagging, their excitement tempered by training, waiting for their share when the meat would be cooked and shared in the evening. And as they turned back toward the city, the forest seemed to close behind them, shadows swallowing the clearing. The deer's herd already far away. The woods gave its gift and reclaimed its silence. And while the hunters carried their prize toward Cahokia, others turned their eyes upward, for in the sky, birds of every kind wheeled and called. At dawn and dusk, the air was alive with wings. Flocks of geese, ducks, and swans traveled along the river roads, their cries echoing across the floodplain. Herons stalked the shallows, their long legs silent in the water. Hawks circled high, their shadows gliding over fields and rooftops. The people of Cahokia watched them all, for the birds were more than food. They were messengers, symbols, and teachers. Hunters approached the river quietly, crouching low among the reeds. Nets were spread wide across narrow channels, woven strong enough to catch the sudden rush of wings. Boys threw stones into the water to drive the ducks upward, and, as the flock lifted in panic, arrows flew, their fletchings whispering against the wind. Some birds fell, others escaped, scattering across the sky. The hunters retrieved what they could, thanking the river for its bounty. Turkeys, too, were a gift of the woods. Whole flocks moved through the underbrush, scratching at leaves and calling to one another in clucks and gobbles. Skilled hunters imitated their cries, luring the birds close. Sometimes nets were drawn tight in ambush. Sometimes arrows struck quick and clean. Their feathers, glossy and dark, were prized for cloaks, mats, and ritual dress. Their bones became tools, their meat-filled bellies. The feathers of birds held power beyond their beauty. Hawks and eagles, swift hunters of the sky, were honored for their strength. Their feathers were carried in ceremonies, tied to staffs, woven into headdresses that marked the dignity of leaders and warriors. The wings of owls were handled carefully, for they carried mystery, a voice of the night that could guide or warn. Even the smallest birds mattered. Bluebirds darted through gardens, bringing cheer and signs of the season. Swallows skimmed low over the river, showing where insects swarmed thick. Each feathered creature had its place in the world's great balance, and the people saw themselves reflected in their flight. One elder, sitting with children at the river's edge, pointed to a flock of geese flying overhead in a sharp V. See how they move together, he said. The one in front tires first, so another takes its place. None fly alone, none are left behind. This is how a people must live, each one carrying the weight for a time, then resting while others lead. So the flock flies farther than any one bird could fly alone. The lesson sank deep into the children's hearts. For them, the geese were not only food, but living teachers, showing the way of unity. When the hunters returned with their catch, the birds were plucked, their feathers saved carefully, their bodies roasted over the fires. Families feasted together, knowing that even the smallest bird had offered itself to their well-being. Songs were sung as feathers were tied into ornaments. each one carrying the memory of sky and flight. And as the day ended, the city filled once more with the sounds of wings, the evening rush of swallows, the cries of cranes, the call of an owl beginning its hunt. The people of Cahokia listened, learning, remembering, giving thanks. For to live here was to share the world with creatures of earth, water, and sky. Each gave something: food, feathers, lessons, or warnings, and each was honored in turn. And beyond the birds, deeper still into the forest, waited other creatures, the prowling beasts of night, whose strength demanded both caution and respect. And beyond the birds, deeper still into the forest, waited other creatures, the prowling beasts of night, whose strength demanded both caution and respect. The people of Cahokia knew these animals well, though they saw them less often than deer or turkey. Their signs were read in tracks pressed into mud, in claw marks on tree trunks, in the low calls that carried across the woods at dusk. Wolves moved in packs, their howls echoing through the floodplain. Cougars padded silently, unseen but never absent. Black bears shuffled through the underbrush, tearing at logs for grubs, or feasting on berries in season. To meet such creatures was to stand at the edge of danger. A careless hunter might be followed by wolves, or stumble into the path of a bear. And yet they were not enemies. Each one had its place, and each one was honored in story and ritual. Wolves were teachers of loyalty and cunning. Hunters often watched their trails, learning how to move together, how to flank and corner prey. Packs could bring down a deer far larger than any one wolf could face alone. Their howls were not only warnings, but reminders that strength lay in unity, and survival came from sharing the hunt. Cougars, rarely seen, were spirits of stealth and power. To glimpse one was to receive a sign, a warning, or a blessing. Their hides were prized, their claws carried as tokens of strength. Stories told of the great cats who stalked silently, striking only when the moment was right. In these tales, the lesson was patience, the art of waiting, the wisdom of unseen strength. Bears were both feared and revered. Their size alone commanded awe, but it was their habits that carried meaning. Each winter they withdrew into hidden dens, sleeping long months beneath the earth. When they returned in spring, lean yet alive, the people saw in them a cycle of death and rebirth, of endurance through darkness. To kill a bear was a grave act, done with prayers and offerings, for its spirit was powerful and long remembered. Its meat fed many, its hide warmed families. Its bones and fat became tools and medicine. Nothing was wasted, for to waste was to anger the bear's spirit. Even smaller predators carried weight in story. Foxes, with their quick movements and clever eyes, were symbols of trickery and survival. Owls, though birds, were often spoken of alongside the beasts of night, their haunting calls tied to omens and wisdom. Each sound in the darkness meant something, and every hunter listened with care. Children were warned of these creatures, not to frighten them, but to teach respect. Step softly, a father might say, as he led his son into the woods. Leave no trace that the wolf can follow. Watch the trees, for the cat watches you. And if you find the bear's trail, walk away, for his strength is greater than yours. These lessons were as important as learning to shoot a bow or throw a spear, for to ignore them was to invite misfortune. At night, when families sat around their hearths, stories of the beasts were told. Some tales warned of hunters who grew arrogant and were punished by wolves. Others spoke of warriors who carried the spirit of the bear into battle, their courage unshaken. Still others described shapeshifters who moved between human and animal, walking the boundary between worlds. For the people of Cahokia, the beasts of the night were more than animals. They were reminders of the power that lived beyond the walls, in the deep forests and endless shadows. They taught humility, patience, courage, and respect. They were woven into daily life, shaping both fear and reverence. And so, the hunters who ventured into the woods did not walk blindly. They carried their weapons, yes, but also their prayers. For every deer taken, every bird snared, every predator avoided or faced, was part of the great balance, the circle that bound people, animals, earth, and sky together. And when the hunts ended, when the animals' gifts were brought home, the work of dividing, cooking, and storing began, filling the city once more with the sense of feast and fire. The day has taken us far, hasn't it? From the river's edge, where nets splashed and arrows flew, to the deep woods, where deer fell silent, to the skies alive with wings, and finally to the shadows, where wolves howled and bears walked unseen. We have followed the hunters of Cahokia into every corner of their world, seeing how food was gathered, but also how respect was given to deer, to birds, to the powerful beasts of night. Each animal was more than a meal. Each one carried a lesson, a gift, a reminder, to waste nothing, to live in balance, to walk with patience and courage. These were the truths the forest taught, and the people of Cahokia listened. And now, I want to ask you something. Imagine yourself living in that city long ago. Imagine you are one of the hunters returning at dusk, or a child hearing stories by the fire. Which creature would have spoken to you most deeply? Would you have walked with the wolf, moving as part of a pack, or followed the silent cougar, patient and unseen? Or perhaps the bear, strong enough to endure the dark months and return with the spring? Tell me in the comments which spirit animal of Cahokia you feel closest to, and why. Your answer will carry the story forward with us, because the hunt does not end with the chase. When the hunters return, the real work begins. Fires lit, meat roasted, hides prepared, bones shaped into tools. And the feast that follows is not only for the belly, but for the spirit, binding families and neighbors together in joy and gratitude. So let us walk back with the hunters now, across the fields, through the palisade, into the heart of Cahokia. The fires are already glowing. The smell of roasted meat drifts on the air. The city is ready to share the gifts of forest and river, sky and field. And there, in the warmth of the feast, we will see how Cahokia gave thanks for the bounty of the hunt. The hunters entered the city as the sun lowered, carrying their prize upon wooden poles and in woven baskets. Dogs padded eagerly at their heels, tails wagging, but held back by sharp commands. Children ran to meet them, eyes wide at the sight of deer, geese, and turkeys, their voices rising in excitement. Elders came too, leaning on canes, their faces solemn, for they knew what this moment meant. Not just food, but blessing. Not just meat, but the balance of life itself. The animals were laid upon mats in the plaza, where women and men together began the work of preparation. Skins were peeled carefully from deer, to be tanned and softened into clothing, shoes, or blankets. Birds were plucked, their feathers set aside in neat bundles for use in cloaks, headdresses, or sacred staffs. Bones were separated with care, some destined for tools, others for ritual offerings. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the gift was used. Large clay pots were brought forth, their sides blackened from many fires. Into them went chunks of venison, wild onions, and beans, simmering together into rich stews. Flat stones were placed at the fire's edge to bake maize bread, its warm scent spreading quickly through the air. Turkeys were roasted whole, their skins crisping in the heat, while geese were stuffed with herbs and roasted slowly, their fat dripping into the flames below. The smoke curled upward, carrying with it the first notes of celebration. Children carried jars of water from the river, pouring them into pots and gourds. Others gathered firewood, piling it high so the flames would not falter through the night. Laughter filled the air as neighbors shared the day's stories of arrows well aimed, of dogs who flushed game, of the bravery of young hunters who had taken part in their first chase. Before the food could be shared, offerings were made. Small portions of meat and bread were placed on clean mats and carried to the mounds. Their prayers were whispered, smoke was lifted, and the ancestors were invited to join in the feast. The people believed that no celebration was whole without them, that those who had built the city and raised its mounds should taste of its bounties still. Back in the plaza, fires glowed brighter as the sky turned dark. The great pots bubbled, releasing steam that mingled with the laughter of the crowd. The smell of roasting meat hung heavy, drawing everyone closer. Musicians arrived, carrying drums stretched with deer hide and flutes carved from bone and cane. Their instruments gave voice to the moment, the beat of drums echoing the heart, the flute's high song lifting toward the stars. The city was ready. The feast was nearly prepared. Soon bowls would be filled, songs would be sung, and joy would spread like fire through the night. And as the pots were stirred and the fires burned high, the time came at last to share the feast with all who had gathered. The plaza glowed with firelight, its wide earth alive with voices. Families brought woven mats and spread them in circles around the flames. Children crowded closest, bowls clutched eagerly in their hands, their faces lit red by the dancing glow. Elders sat nearby, their voices carrying wisdom and blessings, reminding the young to eat with gratitude. The food was passed out in turn. Bowls of steaming stew, rich with venison and beans, warmed the hands of those who held them. Flat cakes of maize bread were broken and shared, their edges crisp, their centers soft. Roasted turkey and goose were carved, the fat dripping onto hot stones, their skins crackling in the fire's heat. Each mouthful was not only nourishment, but a reminder of the day's labor, of the gifts the earth and forest had given. The dogs circled the edges of the crowd, and though they whined and wagged their tails, they were not forgotten. Small bones and scraps were tossed their way, and soon they lay content at the edge of the firelight, gnawing happily while the people ate. Between bites, voices rose. Hunters retold their stories of the chase, their words embroidered with laughter and good-natured boasting. Young ones mimicked them, acting out the moment when the deer leaped or when the birds scattered, their play drawing laughter from the crowd. Women teased the men about the size of their catch, while the men praised the skill of the cooks, who had turned raw meat into meals fit for celebration. When bowls were emptied, the music began. The drums set a steady heartbeat, their deep thrum rising into the night. Flutes answered, their notes winding like river currents through the rhythm. Rattles shook in time, carrying the sound farther still. The people clapped their hands, stamped their feet, and began to dance. The dance was more than joy, it was offering. Circles formed, men and women stepping in patterns that mirrored the movements of the hunt, the planting of seeds, the turning of the seasons. Feathers gleamed in the firelight, copper beads flashed at wrists and necks, shells rattled from belts. Children joined too, their smaller steps weaving among the larger, learning the patterns as they laughed and twirled. Above, the stars shone bright, and the moon lifted higher, watching over the celebration. The people of Cahokia looked upward often, their dancers turning in rhythm with the heavens, for they believed the feast was not only for themselves, but for the spirits above, for the ancestors beneath the mounds, for all who watched and waited in unseen worlds. As the night deepened, songs gave way to stories. Elders raised their voices, weaving tales of old hunts, of heroes and spirits, of times when animals and people spoke the same language. The children leaned forward, their eyes wide, their bellies full, their imaginations carried into places where lessons and wonder walked side by side. The fires burned low, the drums slowed, and one by one, families drifted back toward their homes. The plaza grew quiet, though embers still glowed, their warmth a final blessing for the night. The feast was ended, but its memory lingered, in full stomachs, in laughter remembered, in the rhythm of songs that echoed still in the heart. And so the hunt's gifts were not only eaten, but shared. In food, in story, in dance, in the unbroken bond of a people who lived as one. And when the embers faded, another kind of gathering awaited, one not of feast or hunt, but of worship. In the great temple atop the mound, at the center of Cahokia rose Monk's Mound, vast and silent in the starlight. Its earthen slopes towered above the city, built by countless hands over generations. Basket by basket, soil had been carried from the fields and riverbanks, piled layer upon layer until the mound rose higher than any other. Even now, by firelight, its sides seemed to glow faintly, as though holding within them the memory of every hand that had touched its earth. At the summit stood the great temple, its walls of timber and clay, its roof thatched and steep, its doorway aligned with the path of the sun. Here the sacred fires burned, tended without fail, their smoke rising into the sky like a thread between worlds. The people believed the temple was not only a house for ritual, but a bridge, a place where the living might speak to the spirits above and the ancestors below. On certain nights, after great hunts or feasts, leaders and priests climbed the mound together. Their steps were slow, steady, for the climb itself was part of the ceremony. At the base, families gathered to watch, their faces lifted toward the summit. Children whispered in awe, pointing to the torchlight that flickered as the procession rose higher and higher. Inside the temple, the air was thick with smoke and scent, burning herbs, roasted fat, the tang of cedar. At the center blazed a sacred fire, its coals never cold, fed day and night by keepers chosen for their devotion. Around it stood tall posts, carved and painted, symbols of sun and moon, of birds and beasts, of cycles unending. Offerings lay before the flames, bowls of maize, strips of venison, beads of copper and shell, each one given with prayer. The priests raised their voices in chants, slow and resonant, the rhythm of drums carried up from the plaza below, joining with the chanting until the whole mound seemed to thrum like a heartbeat. Smoke curled toward the roof, slipping out through openings, carrying prayers into the night sky. Those at the base of the mound lifted their hands, speaking silently to the heavens, joining the ritual even from afar. The ceremony told the story of balance, of how the sun gave life, how the moon guided dreams, how the earth bore food, how the ancestors watched from beneath. It was not only ritual but reminder, binding every man, woman, and child to the greater circle. The fire was the center, but the people were its circle, turning as one. Children remembered these nights all their lives. They remembered how the mound loomed above them, vast as a mountain. They remembered the sound of chanting carried on the wind, the shimmer of torches against the dark, the way the fire atop the mound seemed to echo the stars themselves. They remembered the sense of being small, yes, but also part of something endless. When the chanting ceased, silence fell. The priests lowered their hands, the offerings smoldered, the fire blazed steady. The ceremony was done, but its power lingered. Families returned to their homes, speaking softly, as though afraid to break the spell. And atop the mound, The fire still burned, its smoke winding into the heavens, a bridge between the world of Cahokia and the world beyond. And as the sacred flames glowed against the night, the watchers of the sky prepared for another ritual, a circle not of earth, but of posts, where the rising sun would soon reveal its path. The fire still burns atop the mound. Can you see it? Imagine yourself standing far below, your face lifted toward the glow. The voices have quieted, the chants are done, but the flame remains, steady and sure. Its smoke rises into the night like a ladder, rung upon rung, carrying prayers into the sky. We have walked with Cahokia through many rhythms now. We have eaten at their fires, played their games, raised their walls, remembered their ancestors, and joined their hunts. We have climbed the mound, felt the weight of sacred ritual, and seen how the city reached for the heavens through fire and song. Step by step, we are beginning to see how life in Cahokia was not separate pieces, but one great circle. Fields and forests, hunts and feasts, prayers and stories, all turning together. And that circle leads us to what comes next. For beyond the mound, in an open field, another great structure stood. Not a temple this time, but a circle of posts, tall as trees, planted deep in the earth. Some called it a calendar, some called it a compass. But to the people of Cahokia, it was something more, a way to read the sky itself, to follow the sun on its endless journey, to mark the turning of seasons, and to know when to plant, when to harvest, and when to honor the spirits with great festivals. It was here that they watched the solstice sun rise. It was here they gathered at equinox, when day and night walked in balance. It was here that time itself seemed written upon the earth, by shadow, by light, by the slow and steady path of the heavens. But before we step into that circle, I want to ask you a question. If you could stand within it on the morning of a solstice, the sun just cresting the horizon, what would you feel? Would you marvel at the way the posts align with the dawn? Would you sense the ancestors watching, whispering their lessons? Or would you feel small and quiet, awed by the endless turning of sky and earth together? Tell me in the comments. Your reflections are part of this story too. For now, let us leave the fire atop the mound glowing in the night, and let us walk outward to the open field where tall posts rise in a great circle, where sky and earth meet, and where the people of Cahokia waited to greet the sun. And when the first light touched the horizon, the circle of posts revealed its secret. Long before that morning came, the people had gathered on the open ground west of the great mound. There they dug deep holes in the earth, wide enough for posts thick as a man's body. Trunks of red cedar, straight and tall, were carried on the shoulders of many, their bark stripped, their ends sharpened. With ropes of twisted fiber and strong hands working together, each post was lifted and lowered into place, standing upright in its hollow, then packed firm with soil and stone. One by one, the circle took shape. Not a wall, not a fence, but a ring, wide as a field, open to the sky. Each post marked a place where the sun would rise or set at different times of the year. The longest day, the shortest day, the equal days between. The people of Cahokia were not only builders of earth, but readers of the heavens. They understood that time itself moved in cycles, just as the river rose and fell, just as maize sprouted, grew, and was gathered. The circle was their way of setting those truths into the ground, so all could see and remember. Families came to watch as the work continued. Children ran between the posts, marveling at their height, asking what it all meant. Elders stood quietly, nodding, for they had seen circles before, older and smaller, yet never so grand as this one. Priests guided the placement. their eyes fixed not on the earth but on the horizon, aligning each post with the sun's path. For this was not just wood in the ground, it was a map of the sky, a great calendar that would turn with the seasons. When at last the final post was raised, the people stepped back and looked. The ring stood tall, encircling the field, open to sun, moon, and stars. It was both simple and profound, a circle of trees planted not to grow but to watch, not to shade but to guide. In its stillness, it held the movement of the heavens, and so the circle was ready. In days to come, they would gather here at dawn and at dusk, waiting in silence as the sun itself revealed the meaning of their work. And when the appointed morning came, they stood together in the circle, waiting for the first fire of the sky to rise. The air was cool, the grass wet with dew, families gathered in silence, their breath visible in the pale light before dawn. Children clutched their mothers' hands, whispering questions, hushed quickly by a nod toward the horizon. Hunters stood still as trees, spears in hand, not for use but as symbols of strength. Elders leaned upon canes, their faces calm, for they had seen this morning many times before, yet it never ceased to amaze. In the center of the circle, priests lit a small fire. Its smoke curled upward, pale against the dark sky, carrying prayers to greet the sun. They sprinkled maize into the flames, a gift of thanks for light and life, and lifted their arms toward the east. All eyes followed. The horizon glowed faintly, a line of gold spreading slowly above the earth. Then, as if answering the call of drum and song, the sun's rim appeared, blazing between two posts set carefully to mark this very day. Gasps rose from the crowd. The posts and the sun aligned perfectly, as though the sky itself had been summoned to the gathering. The priests chanted, their voices low and steady. Drums echoed like heartbeats, deep and slow. The people lifted their hands, some closing their eyes, some whispering words of gratitude. For this was not only the dawn of a new day, it was the turning of the year. The moment when darkness began to give way to light, or when light gave way to darkness. Each solstice told a different story, but both carried the same truth. The world moved in a circle, endless and eternal. Children looked on in awe, seeing the posts not as wood but as gateways, frames through which the sun revealed its path. Some would remember this moment all their lives. The way the golden light struck the posts, the way the crowd seemed to breathe as one, the way the heavens and earth moved in harmony. When the sun climbed higher, the drums quickened, flutes joined in, and the people began to dance. Their feet stamped the earth, their voices rose in song. They danced in circles, mirroring the posts, mirroring the turning of the sun itself. Feathered cloaks shimmered, shell beads rattled, copper ornaments caught the light. It was both celebration and ceremony, joy and reverence woven together. Offerings were laid at the base of the posts. Small bowls of food, beads of shell, feathers of hawk and goose. These gifts were not to the wood itself, but to the power it represented. To the sun whose warmth ripened the fields, to the sky whose order gave life rhythm, to the ancestors who had taught the people how to read the heavens. As the ceremony drew on, the circle of posts seemed to fade into the background, for it was not the wood that mattered, but what it revealed. The posts were guides, but the true teacher was the sky, and the people of Cahokia listened well. By midday, the fire in the center burned low. The songs grew softer, and the families began to drift back toward their homes. Yet the memory of the sunrise lingered in every heart, a reminder that their lives were part of a greater turning. The posts would stand through the seasons, watching silently, until the next gathering brought the people together again. And so the Woodhenge was not only a calendar, but a promise that the sun would always return, that the cycle would continue, and that Cahokia would remain in harmony with the sky. And while the posts kept their silent watch, life in the city below returned to its rhythm, fields to tend, fires to light, children to teach, and stories to tell. For in Cahokia, every day was also a classroom. The children of the city did not sit in wooden benches or write upon tablets. Instead, their lessons were lived, woven into the rhythm of work and play, of story and song. Learning was not apart from life. It was life itself, taught in each task, each tale, each sunrise and sunset. At dawn, children followed their mothers to the gardens. They learned how to plant maize in mounded rows, how to press beans beside the stalks so they could climb, how to scatter squash seeds to shade the soil. They were taught to watch the sky, to notice the clouds and winds, to listen to the rustle of leaves for signs of rain. Small hands dug in the soil, guided by larger ones, and in the dirt they learned patience, for crops did not grow overnight, but in seasons. By midday, boys might follow their fathers into the fields or forest. Here they learned to carry small bows, to set traps for rabbits, to listen for the rustle of game. At first their arrows missed, their traps empty, but mistakes were part of the lesson. The deer will not wait for a careless step, a father might say. Learn to walk as if your feet have eyes. Bit by bit, the children grew into the skills that would one day feed their families. Girls, too, were taught vital crafts. In shaded courtyards, they sat with mothers and aunts, weaving baskets from river reeds, smoothing clay into pots, sewing hides with bone needles. They listened as older women spoke of herbs that healed fevers, of roots that soothed pain, of seeds that brought strength. With every stitch, every thread, they wove not only tools, but the memory of their people. Yet lessons were not only worked. In the evenings, as fires flickered, children gathered around elders to hear stories. These were not mere entertainments, but teachings hidden in tale. A story of a fox who tricked a stronger beast, taught cunning and wit. A story of a wolf pack reminded them of loyalty. A story of a bear sleeping through the winter carried the wisdom of endurance. In this way, animals became teachers, spirits became guides, and children learned what words could hold when spoken with care. Play, too, was part of the learning. Children tossed balls of hide through woven hoops, raced across fields, balanced on logs, and splashed in the shallows of the river. These games taught strength, speed, balance, and laughter, all skills they would carry into adulthood. Even their laughter echoed lessons, reminding the people that joy was as vital as food. Sometimes the lessons turned solemn. A child might be brought to the mound to watch a ceremony, their eyes wide at the fire, the chanting, the rising sun. They were told to be still, to remember, to know that they were part of something greater than themselves. Such moments sank deep, shaping hearts as much as hands and minds. And so the children of Cahokia grew not in classrooms, but in circles. Circles of family, of neighbors, of stories, of ceremony. Each circle held them, taught them, shaped them. In time, they would become the farmers, the hunters, the weavers, the leaders, the storytellers, the ones who would guide the next generation, and so the circle would turn again. And as those circles of learning turned, so too did the seasons, carrying the city toward times of both abundance and challenge, when all these lessons would be needed most. The people of Cahokia lived in rhythm with the year, each season marking a new task, a new mood, a new story. The Woodhenge told them when the sun shifted, but their fields, rivers, and skies confirmed what their eyes already knew, That time moved in cycles, always returning, yet never the same twice. In spring, the riverbanks swelled with snowmelt from faraway lands, sometimes spilling across the fields in floods that threatened the maize mounds. Men and women rushed to shore, the edges, piling brush and earth to guard the crops. Yet the same floods left behind rich soil, dark and fertile, a gift hidden in the danger. Children learned to see both, the peril and the blessing woven together. Summer brought green abundance. Maize stalks rose tall, their leaves rustling like voices in the wind. Beans climbed in winding spirals, and squash spread wide, shading the earth below. Hunters moved deeper into the forests, where deer grew sleek and strong. Fish swam thick in the rivers, caught in nets and traps, roasted over evening fires. Families worked long days, yet laughter often carried across the fields, for food was growing, and the people felt the warmth of plenty. Autumn was the season of harvest. Families cut maize stalks, shelling kernels to dry and store in great baskets. Squash and beans were gathered, berries crushed into cakes, meat smoked over slow fires. The plaza filled with stores of food, enough to carry through the long cold ahead. Feasts and ceremonies gave thanks, honoring the spirits of earth and sky for their generosity. Children learned the importance of storing wisely, of keeping for the lean times. Do not eat all in times of plenty, elders reminded them. Winter always comes, and winter did come, with its quiet and its tests. The fields lay bare beneath frost, the river slowed to ice along its edges, the nights stretched long. Families huddled in their homes, warmed by fires, telling stories, repairing tools, weaving baskets. Food was measured carefully, each pot of stew shared with thought. Hunters tracked deer through snow, their breath rising white in the stillness, while the wolves howled across the frozen plain. In these months, patience and endurance were the greatest lessons of all. Through it all, the people of Cahokia adapted. Flood or drought, heat or frost, they relied on one another and on the teachings passed down from elder to child. They watched the stars and the sun, the birds and the river, finding guidance in every sign. The seasons turned, and the people turned with them, never apart, always part of the great circle. And yet, with each turning of the seasons, the city itself was changing too, growing larger, drawing more people, weaving together many nations into one. And with growth came both strength and tension, as new voices joined the chorus of Cahokia. And yet, with each turning of the seasons, the city itself was changing too, growing larger, drawing more people, weaving together many nations into one. Cahokia was not only a village, nor even only a city. It was a gathering place, a heart that beat for the whole region. From the north came traders with copper from the Great Lakes, shining red in the firelight. From the south came seashells from the Gulf Coast, carved into beads and ornaments. From the west came stone, sharpened into blades and axes. From the east came mica and chert, gleaming with strange brilliance. All these things flowed into Cahokia, carried by rivers and trails, and with them came the people who brought them. The city's streets echoed with many languages. Some were sharp and quick, others soft and rolling, each carrying stories from distant lands. Families built new homes within the palisade, bringing their own customs, foods, and songs. At first they were strangers, but slowly they became neighbors, weaving their lives into the fabric of the great city. In the plazas, one could see this diversity most clearly. Farmers from nearby villages traded baskets of maize for copper ornaments brought from afar. Hunters from distant forests taught new methods of tracking, while artisans from far rivers showed new patterns of pottery. Women compared weaving styles, children shared games, and storytellers swapped tales until their voices blended into something new. Yet diversity also brought tension. Not all traditions were the same, not all beliefs aligned. Some argued over how rituals should be performed, whose ancestors should be honored, which stories held the most truth. Leaders gathered often to settle disputes, to remind the people that unity was their strength. The geese fly farther together, one elder would say, repeating the lesson of the sky. So must we. Still, the city thrived. Its mounds rose higher, its plazas grew busier, its fires burned brighter. The very size of Cahokia was astonishing to those who arrived for the first time. Some whispered it was a place touched by the spirits, a city unlike any other on earth. Children growing up within its walls came to see diversity not as strangeness, but as the way of life. They learned to recognize accents, to taste foods from faraway lands, to dance to rhythms brought from distant rivers. In their laughter and play, one could glimpse the future of Cahokia, a people greater than the sum of their parts, held together by the circle of mound, plaza, and sky. And so Cahokia became not only a city, but a meeting ground of nations, a place where rivers of people flowed together into one great current. And as that current grew stronger, so too did the power of its leaders, whose voices carried over the mounds and into the hearts of the people. Cahokia was not held together by walls alone, nor even by its great feasts and ceremonies. It was bound by voices, voices of leaders who guided the people, who settled disputes, who gave order to a city vast enough to rival the forests around it. Without such voices, the city might have scattered like geese in a storm. With them, it became a living whole. At the highest point of authority stood a ruler, remembered in later stories as the Great Sun, or the chief above chiefs. His home and temple rose atop the largest mound, towering above the city. From this height, he looked out over the fields, the plazas, the palisade, and the river beyond. To many, he was more than a man. He was the bridge between earth and sky, chosen to carry the prayers of the people to the spirits above. When he spoke not only with his own voice, but with the weight of ancestors and the fire of the sun. Yet he was not alone. Around him gathered councils of elders, priests, and skilled warriors. Each voice carried wisdom from a different part of the circle. Elders remembered the past, holding the memory of generations. Priests read the stars and the seasons, guiding when to plant and when to hold ceremonies. Warriors spoke for the strength of the people, reminding all that the city's safety depended on courage and vigilance. Together, these voices shaped the path of Cahokia. Decisions were not always simple. The city was vast, and the needs of farmers, hunters, traders, and artisans did not always align. Some wanted more land cleared, others feared the anger of the forest. Some urged for greater trade with distant peoples, others warned of strangers bringing discord. Around the fire, voices rose in debate, each one carrying truth from its own place. The role of the leader was not only to command, but to weave these voices into harmony, so that the city could act as one. The people watched closely, for leadership was not only power, but responsibility. A chief who failed to feed his people, who ignored the signs of the sky, who wasted the gifts of the hunt, would lose respect. Authority flowed from the people upward as much as it flowed downward from the mound. To lead was to carry a heavy burden, one measured in full baskets of maize, in peace among neighbors. In fires kept burning through the coldest night, ceremonies reinforced this bond. When the ruler stood before the people, clad in feathers and copper, he was not only himself, he was the city embodied. The rising sun was reflected in his ornaments, the the strength of the deer carried in his cloak, the wisdom of the ancestors spoken in his chants. Children looked up at him in awe, not because of his wealth alone, but because they believed he walked between worlds on their behalf. And yet, in the quiet moments of the city, power was softer, less visible. It was the grandmother teaching her grandchild how to shape clay. It was the father showing his son how to walk without sound in the forest. It was the trader who connected distant villages, the healer who soothed fevers, the storyteller who preserved memory. These, too, were voices of power, though they did not stand atop mounds or wear cloaks of feathers. They kept the circle whole, ensuring that Cahokia was not only a city of rulers, but a city of people. Thus, power in Cahokia was many-layered. At its peak, it shone in the temple fires and the voices of leaders. But, at its roots, it whispered in the daily acts of teaching, healing, and remembering. Together, these voices made the city strong, guiding it through both abundance and trial. And, in time, trials would come, storms not only of rain and flood, but of people, as neighbors near and far began to test the strength of Cahokia's circle. For no city, no matter how mighty, lives only in peace. Just as the river floods in spring, threatening the very fields it nourishes, so too did troubles rise as Cahokia grew. With greatness came envy, with abundance came hunger, with power came challenge. The first storms were of nature itself. Floodwaters sometimes rose too high, swallowing fields before the maize could ripen. At other times, droughts cracked the earth, leaving the stalks stunted and dry. Families worried over their baskets of stored grain, counting each kernel, each dried squash, each smoked fish. The priests turned their eyes to the heavens, reading the signs of sun and moon, seeking guidance in the stars. Some prayed more fervently, leaving offerings at the mounds, hoping the ancestors would intercede. These trials taught patience, endurance, and the limits of human strength before the will of nature. But storms also came from people. Cahokia's reach spread wide, drawing villages into its orbit, demanding tribute of maize, labor, or loyalty. Not all were willing. Some chafed at the weight of Cahokia's power, whispering that the city grew too greedy, that its rulers claimed too much. Rumors carried on the wind of villages refusing tribute, of hunters from distant lands clashing with Cahokia's men in the forests of trade routes, threatened by rivals who wanted the copper, the shells, the stone for themselves. Inside the city walls, tensions stirred as well. With so many nations gathered, voices sometimes rose in anger. Disputes over land, over marriages, over the proper way to honor the spirits threatened to divide neighbors. Leaders held councils late into the night, seeking compromise, weaving unity where discord threatened to unravel the fabric of the city. Warriors sharpened their weapons. Young men trained in the plaza, hurling spears, drawing bows, learning the art of moving swift and silent. Some prepared not only to hunt deer, but to defend the city itself. Scouts patrolled the riverbanks, their eyes watchful for raiders who might strike at fields or storehouses. And yet, for all these storms, Cahokia still stood tall. Its mounds rose steady, its fires burned bright, its people continued their planting, their feasting, their ceremonies. The city endured because it carried not only strength in arms, but strength in spirit. Bound together by shared stories, shared rituals, shared dreams. But even as the fires glowed and the drums echoed, whispers spread, that greater trials lay ahead, storms that would test not only the walls and weapons of Cahokia, but the very heart of its people. And so the people looked to their leaders, to their ancestors, and to the sky itself, wondering what the next turning of the circle would bring. The fires of Cahokia still glow, the mounds still rise, the river still flows, but can you feel it? Beneath the songs and the laughter, beneath the harvest and the feasts, there is a tension in the air, like the heavy silence before a storm. We have seen how the city grew from a cluster of fields into a living heart that drew people from every direction. We have walked its plazas, climbed its mounds, feasted at its fires, watched the sun rise between sacred posts. We have learned the lessons of deer and turkey, of wolf and bear, of stories whispered to children as they drifted to sleep. We have felt the circle of life itself, turning with the seasons. But now another lesson comes, the lesson of struggle. No city can grow without straining its ties. No people can thrive without testing their strength. Cahokia's neighbors whisper in jealousy, its tributaries murmur in resentment, its own crowded streets echo with disputes. Nature itself has challenged the city, with floods too high and droughts too long. And now the question rises, when the storm comes, will Cahokia endure? It is here that another part of life comes into focus, the path of the warrior. Not only a hunter, not only a man of war, but a protector, a guardian, one who carries the weight of the people in his courage. Some young men trained in the plaza, their spears rising and falling in rhythm. Some stood watch upon the palisade, eyes sharp in the darkness. Some carried dreams of glory. Others carried the heavier burden of fear. And so I want to ask you something. If you lived in Cahokia, would you have chosen the warrior's path? Would you have taken up the bow and spear, ready to defend your people when danger came? Or would you have walked another road, one of farming, of weaving, of healing, of storytelling? Which role would your heart have chosen? Tell me in the comments. Your voices are part of this story, just as every role was part of Cahokia, because soon the drumbeats will change. They will not only echo in feasts, but in training grounds. They will not only carry joy, but warning. The warrior's path awaits, and through it we will see how Cahokia faced storms both within and without. And when the call came, the warriors answered, stepping onto the path that would test both their skill and their spirit. From a young age, boys who showed strength and courage were trained not only to hunt, but to fight. The skills were kin to one another. The steady hand that drew a bow for deer could also draw it against an enemy. The silent step that approached a turkey could also approach a rival unseen. Yet to become a warrior was to learn more than hunting. It was to learn discipline, endurance, and unity. Autumn was the season of harvest. Families cut maize stalks, shelling kernels to dry and store in great baskets. Squash and beans were gathered, berries crushed into cakes, meat smoked over slow fires. The plaza filled with stores of food, enough to carry through the long cold ahead. Feasts and ceremonies gave thanks, honoring the spirits of earth and sky for their generosity. Children learned the importance of storing wisely, of keeping for the lean times. Do not eat all in times of plenty, elders reminded them. Winter always comes, and winter did come, with its quiet and its tests. The fields lay bare beneath frost, the river slowed to ice along its edges, the nights stretched long. Families huddled in their homes, warmed by fires, telling stories, repairing tools, weaving baskets. Food was measured carefully, each pot of stew shared with thought. Hunters tracked deer through snow, their breath rising white in the stillness, while the wolves howled across the frozen plain. In these months, patience and endurance were the greatest lessons of all. Through it all, the people of Cahokia adapted. Flood or drought, heat or frost, they relied on one another and on the teachings passed down from elder to child. They watched the stars and the sun, the birds and the river, finding guidance in every sign. The seasons turned, and the people turned with them, never apart, always part of the great circle. And yet, with each turning of the seasons, the city itself was changing too, growing larger, drawing more people, weaving together many nations into one. And with growth came both strength and tension, as new voices joined the chorus of Cahokia. Cahokia was not only a village, nor even only a city. It was a gathering place, a heart that beat for the whole region. From the north came traders with copper from the Great Lakes, shining red in the firelight. From the south came seashells from the Gulf Coast, carved into beads and ornaments. From the west came stone, sharpened into blades and axes. From the east came mica and chert, gleaming with strange brilliance. All these things flowed into Cahokia, carried by rivers and trails, and with them came the people who brought them. The city's streets echoed with many languages. Some were sharp and quick, others soft and rolling, each carrying stories from distant lands. Families built new homes within the palisade, bringing their own customs, foods, and songs. At first they were strangers, but slowly they became neighbors, weaving their lives into the fabric of the great city. In the plazas, one could see this diversity most clearly. Farmers from nearby villages traded baskets of maize for copper ornaments brought from afar. Hunters from distant forests taught new methods of tracking, while artisans from far rivers showed new patterns of pottery. Women compared weaving styles, children shared games, and storytellers swapped tales until their voices blended into something new. Yet diversity also brought tension. Not all traditions were the same, not all beliefs aligned. Some argued over how rituals should be performed, whose ancestors should be honored, which stories held the most truth. Leaders gathered often to settle disputes, to remind the people that unity was their strength. The geese fly farther together, one elder would say, repeating the lesson of the sky. So must we. Still, the city thrived. Its mounds rose higher, its plazas grew busier, its fires burned brighter. The very size of Cahokia was astonishing to those who arrived for the first time. Some whispered it was a place touched by the spirits, a city unlike any other on earth. Children growing up within its walls came to see diversity not as strangeness, but as the way of life. They learned to recognize accents, to taste foods from faraway lands, to dance to rhythms brought from distant rivers. In their laughter and play, one could glimpse the future of Cahokia, a people greater than the sum of their parts, held together by the circle of mound, plaza, and sky. And so Cahokia became not only a city, but a meeting ground of nations, a place where rivers of people flowed together into one great current. And as that current grew stronger, so too did the power of its leaders, whose voices carried over the mounds and into the hearts of the people. Cahokia was not held together by walls alone, nor even by its great feasts and ceremonies. It was bound by voices, voices of leaders who guided the people, who settled disputes, who gave order to a city vast enough to rival the forests around it. Without such voices, the city might have scattered like geese in a storm. With them, it became a living whole. At the highest point of authority stood a ruler, remembered in later stories as the Great Sun, or the chief above chiefs. His home and temple rose atop the largest mound, towering above the city. From this height, he looked out over the fields, the plazas, the palisade, and the river beyond. To many, he was more than a man. He was the bridge between earth and sky, chosen to carry the prayers of the people to the spirits above. When he spoke not only with his own voice, but with the weight of ancestors and the fire of the sun. Yet he was not alone. Around him gathered councils of elders, priests, and skilled warriors. Each voice carried wisdom from a different part of the circle. Elders remembered the past, holding the memory of generations. Priests read the stars and the seasons, guiding when to plant and when to hold ceremonies. Warriors spoke for the strength of the people, reminding all that the city's safety depended on courage and vigilance. Together, these voices shaped the path of Cahokia. Decisions were not always simple. The city was vast, and the needs of farmers, hunters, traders, and artisans did not always align. Some wanted more land cleared, others feared the anger of the forest. Some urged for greater trade with distant peoples, others warned of strangers bringing discord. Around the fire, voices rose in debate, each one carrying truth from its own place. The role of the leader was not only to command, but to weave these voices into harmony, so that the city could act as one. The people watched closely, for leadership was not only power, but responsibility. A chief who failed to feed his people, who ignored the signs of the sky, who wasted the gifts of the hunt, would lose respect. Authority flowed from the people upward as much as it flowed downward from the mound. To lead was to carry a heavy burden, one measured in full baskets of maize, in peace among neighbors. In fires kept burning through the coldest night, ceremonies reinforced this bond. When the ruler stood before the people, clad in feathers and copper, he was not only himself, he was the city embodied. The rising sun was reflected in his ornaments, the strength of the deer carried in his cloak, the wisdom of the ancestors spoken in his chants. Children looked up at him in awe, not because of his wealth alone, but because they believed he walked between worlds on their behalf. And yet, in the quiet moments of the city, power was softer, less visible. It was the grandmother teaching her grandchild how to shape clay. It was the father showing his son how to walk without sound in the forest. It was the trader who connected distant villages, the healer who soothed fevers, the storyteller who preserved memory. These, too, were voices of power, though they did not stand atop mounds or wear cloaks of feathers. They kept the circle whole, ensuring that Cahokia was not only a city of rulers, but a city of people. Thus, power in Cahokia was many-layered. At its peak, it shone in the temple fires and the voices of leaders. But, at its roots, it whispered in the daily acts of teaching, healing, and remembering. Together, these voices made the city strong, guiding it through both abundance and trial. And, in time, trials would come, storms not only of rain and flood, but of people, as neighbors near and far began to test the strength of Cahokia's circle. Threatening the very fields it nourishes, so too did troubles rise as Cahokia grew. With greatness came envy, with abundance came hunger, with power came challenge. The first storms were of nature itself. Floodwaters sometimes rose too high, swallowing fields before the maize could ripen. At other times, droughts cracked the earth, leaving the stalks stunted and dry. Families worried over their baskets of stored grain, counting each kernel, each dried squash, each smoked fish. The priests turned their eyes to the heavens, reading the signs of sun and moon, seeking guidance in the stars. Some prayed more fervently, leaving offerings at the mounds, hoping the ancestors would intercede. These trials taught patience, endurance, and the limits of human strength before the will of nature. But storms also came from people. Cahokia's reach spread wide, drawing villages into its orbit, demanding tribute of maize, labor, or loyalty. Not all were willing. Some chafed at the weight of Cahokia's power, whispering that the city grew too greedy, that its rulers claimed too much. Rumors carried on the wind of villages refusing tribute, of hunters from distant lands clashing with Cahokia's men in the forests of trade routes, threatened by rivals who wanted the copper, the shells, the stone for themselves. Inside the city walls, tensions stirred as well. With so many nations gathered, voices sometimes rose in anger. Disputes over land, over marriages, over the proper way to honor the spirits threatened to divide neighbors. Leaders held councils late into the night, seeking compromise, weaving unity where discord threatened to unravel the fabric of the city. Warriors sharpened their weapons. Young men trained in the plaza, hurling spears, drawing bows, learning the art of moving swift and silent. Some prepared not only to hunt deer, but to defend the city itself. Scouts patrolled the riverbanks, their eyes watchful for raiders who might strike at fields or storehouses. And yet, for all these storms, Cahokia still stood tall. Its mounds rose steady, its fires burned bright, its people continued their planting, their feasting, their ceremonies. The city endured because it carried not only strength in arms, but strength in spirit. Bound together by shared stories, shared rituals, shared dreams. But even as the fires glowed and the drums echoed, whispers spread that greater trials lay ahead, storms that would test not only the walls and weapons of Cahokia, but the very heart of its people. And so the people looked to their leaders, to their ancestors, and to the sky itself, wondering what the next turning of the circle would bring. The fires of Cahokia still glow, the mounds still rise, the river still flows, but can you feel it? Beneath the songs and the laughter, beneath the harvest and the feasts, there is a tension in the air, like the heavy silence before a storm. We have seen how the city grew from a cluster of fields into a living heart that drew people from every direction. We have walked its plazas, climbed its mounds, feasted at its fires, watched the sun rise between sacred posts. We have learned the lessons of deer and turkey, of wolf and bear, of stories whispered to children as they drifted to sleep. We have felt the circle of life itself, turning with the seasons. But now, another lesson comes, the lesson of struggle. No city can grow without straining its ties. No people can thrive without testing their strength. Cahokia's neighbors whisper in jealousy, its tributaries murmur in resentment, its own crowded streets echo with disputes. Nature itself has challenged the city, with floods too high and droughts too long. And now the question rises, when the storm comes, will Cahokia endure? It is here that another part of life comes into focus, the path of the warrior. Not only a hunter, not only a man of war, but a protector, a guardian, one who carries the weight of the people in his courage. Some young men trained in the plaza, their spears rising and falling in rhythm. Some stood watch upon the palisade, eyes sharp in the darkness. Some carried dreams of glory. Others carried the heavier burden of fear. And so I want to ask you something. If you lived in Cahokia, would you have chosen the warrior's path? Would you have taken up the bow and spear, ready to defend your people when danger came? Or would you have walked another road, one of farming, of weaving, of healing, of storytelling? Which role would your heart have chosen? Tell me in the comments. Your voices are part of this story, just as every role was part of Cahokia. Because soon the drumbeats will change. They will not only echo in feasts, but in training grounds. They will not only carry joy, but warning. The warrior's path awaits, and through it we will see how Cahokia faced storms both within and without. And when the call came, the warriors answered, stepping onto the path that would test both their skill and their spirit. From a young age, boys who showed strength and courage were trained not only to hunt, but to fight. The skills were kin to one another. The steady hand that drew a bow for deer could also draw it against an enemy. The silent step that approached a turkey could also approach a rival unseen. Yet to become a warrior was to learn more than hunting. It was to learn discipline, endurance, and unity. In the wide plaza, groups of youths gathered under the eyes of seasoned fighters. They practiced with spears, learning to thrust and to throw. They ran long distances, testing their stamina, for a warrior might chase a fleeing enemy across fields or retreat swiftly to the safety of the palisade. They learned to move in silence, to blend with trees and tall grass, to watch the ground for the smallest sign of passage. Their weapons were simple, yet powerful. The bow, carved from hickory or ash, bent with strength, sending arrows tipped with sharpened stone or bone. Some arrows were fletched for speed, others for piercing strength. Spears, too, were vital. Short ones for thrusting in close combat, long ones for casting from afar. Clubs, carved from hardwood, edged with stone blades, could shatter bone with a single strike. And always there was the otlotol, the spear thrower, an ancient tool that sent darts flying farther and faster than the arm alone. Shields of woven cane or thick hide offered protection, light enough to carry, but strong enough to turn an arrow. Armor was rare, for speed and agility mattered more than weight. But some warriors wore hardened leather or breastplates of wood and shell in times of great conflict. Painted faces and feathers completed the image, turning the warrior's body into both weapon and symbol. But strength of arm was not enough. A warrior had to train his mind as well. He learned to endure hunger, thirst, cold nights. He learned to obey commands, to trust his fellows, to act as part of a unit. One man alone could fall easily, but a band of warriors moving together, shields raised, bows drawn in unison, could hold off even a larger enemy. Training was not only for defense. Warriors were expected to guard the honor of Cahokia, to ensure tribute was paid, to keep trade routes safe. Their presence was both shield and warning, that Cahokia was strong, that its people would not be taken lightly. At night, by the fires, young warriors listened to the elders tell stories of battles long past, of brave men who defended the city walls, of cunning scouts who brought warning in time, of those who gave their lives so that their families might live. These stories were not told for glory alone, but for teaching. They carried the weight of duty, reminding each youth that to walk the warrior's path was to carry the safety of many upon his shoulders. And as they trained, the city watched. Mothers worried, children admired, elders nodded. For all knew that one day, perhaps soon, those spears and bows would be needed, not in games of practice, but in the defense of fields, homes, and lives. And so, beyond the skill of hand and the strength of body, another lesson waited: the meaning of warfare itself, the balance of violence and peace, of destruction and survival. For the people of Cahokia, war was never only about bloodshed. It was about balance, honor, and the circle of life. To fight was not done lightly. It came when peace failed, when tribute was refused, when trade was threatened, when enemies struck without warning. In such times, warriors became the shield of their people, standing between danger and the homes, fields, and families that depended on them. The decision to go to war was not made by warriors alone. Councils gathered, leaders and priests debated. Elders spoke of caution. Offerings were made at the mounds, fires lit, prayers sent to the ancestors. For war disturbed the harmony of the circle, and so it was entered only with gravity. Only when necessity pressed too hard to ignore. When battle came, it was fierce and swift. Skirmishes flared along riverbanks or in the woods, arrows flying in sudden storms, spears thrusting in the chaos. Yet rarely did battles last long. Victory or defeat was often decided quickly, for both sides knew the cost of prolonged fighting. To lose too many warriors was to weaken the whole people, and so restraint and strategy mattered as much as courage. But warfare was not only blood and weapons, it was also ceremony. Before battle, warriors painted their faces with colors that carried meaning. Red for blood and courage, black for death and power, white for purity or vision. Feathers tied in hair or 2 spears invoked the spirits of hawks and eagles, swift hunters of the sky. Songs were sung to give strength, prayers whispered for protection. In this way, battle became both a physical and a spiritual struggle. When victory was won, it was celebrated not with arrogance but with thanksgiving. Feasts were held, offerings given, dances performed. The people honored not only their own warriors, but also the spirits of those who had fallen, for all lives were part of the great circle. Defeat, too, carried lessons, teaching humility, patience, and the need for unity. For the warrior's path was never about glory alone. It was about service, defending fields from raiders, ensuring that children could grow, that elders could rest, that the city could endure another season. A warrior's honor was measured not by how many he struck down, but by how well he protected the circle of life around him. And so, the people of Cahokia lived in a tension between peace and conflict. They sought harmony in feasts, ceremonies, and farming, yet they also prepared for war, knowing that storms of people could be as fierce as storms of rain. The Woodhenge might mark the turning of the sun, but the warriors marked the turning of fate, ready when the circle demanded their strength. And as the city grew ever larger, and its walls stood ever taller, another storm gathered. One not of enemy villages alone, but of the very weight of its own greatness. Cahokia had risen swiftly, like maize bursting from rich soil. From a cluster of settlements, it had become the greatest city north of the Valley of Mexico, its mounds towering above the plain, its plazas alive with voices from many nations. Its strength was its size, its diversity, its abundance. Yet those same gifts carried a burden. The fields stretched wide, and still they were not always enough. To feed tens of thousands required endless planting, harvesting, and storing. Each family worked long days in the sun, yet a poor harvest or a flood could leave the city anxious. The rulers organized granaries, vast storehouses where maize was kept for times of need. But with this came responsibility, to distribute fairly, to prevent hunger, to ensure that no family was forgotten. A mistake could bring anger, suspicion, even rebellion. The palisade, too, was a symbol of both strength and strain. To build and maintain those great walls required constant labor, cutting trees, hauling logs, digging ditches. It was protection, yes, but also a reminder that danger was never far. Some whispered that the city was becoming a fortress, more focused on guarding itself than reaching outward to neighbors. Inside the walls, the streets grew crowded. Houses clustered close together, families pressed side by side. The air carried the smells of smoke, of food cooking, of hides curing, of bodies working. With so many people came noise, disputes, and disease. Illness spread quickly, and healers worked tirelessly with herbs and prayers to soothe fevers and pains. Some said the spirits were angered by the crowding, that the city had grown beyond what the earth wished to carry. Leaders bore the heaviest weight. The ruler upon the mound was praised for Cahokia's greatness, yet also blamed when troubles came. Elders murmured of past times, when the city was smaller, simpler, easier to sustain. Priests warned of omens in the sky, comets, eclipses, strange alignments that spoke of imbalance. Warriors reminded all that enemies watched, waiting for weakness. The burden of greatness pressed from every side. And yet, despite these strains, Cahokia still thrived. The markets bustled, the fields produced, the mounds rose higher, the feasts echoed with music. The city lived on the edge of abundance and fragility, walking a narrow path where one misstep might lead to ruin. Children, watching their parents toil in the fields, or hearing their elders speak in hushed tones, sensed this weight too. They learned that greatness was not only triumph, it was also responsibility. To live in Cahokia was to carry that burden together, to share both the blessings and the strains of the largest city their world had ever known. And in time, the weight grew heavier still, as cracks began to form in the circle. Cracks that no feast, no mound, no wall could entirely mend. At first, the changes were subtle. A quarrel in the market, harsher than before. A family leaving their home to settle in the countryside, muttering that the city's fields no longer fed them. A whispered doubt about whether the ruler's voice still carried the favor of the spirits. Small things scattered like stones in the river. Yet enough stones can change the river's flow. The city's size, once its strength, became its strain. Crowded homes meant that disease spread quickly. A single cough in one house soon echoed through the streets. Healers did their best with herbs and smoke, but some fevers lingered, leaving families weakened. Hunger, too, gnawed at the edges. When harvests faltered, whether by flood, drought, or exhausted soil, the granaries could not always keep pace. Some said the rulers favored their kin, giving more to some than others. Whether true or not, the rumor was enough to sow distrust. Disputes among nations within the city grew sharper. Villagers who had once joined willingly began to question the tribute demanded of them. Traders from distant places sometimes chose other routes, avoiding Cahokia's markets. Councils met more often, voices rising in frustration, yet solutions came slower. The geese still flew in their V across the sky, but within the city, unity began to fray. Even the earth seemed unsettled. Archaeologists today speak of great floods and shifts in climate in those years. Though to the people themselves, it felt as if the spirits of water and sky were restless. A season to wet, another to dry, and the delicate balance of maize fields was broken. Families prayed at the mounds, but when the offerings failed to bring relief, some began to doubt not only the ancestors but the leaders who claimed to speak for them. And so, the circle that had bound Cahokia together began to show its cracks. The great city still stood, its mounds tall, its plaza busy, its fires bright. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Where once harmony seemed unshakable, now uncertainty grew. Where once the voices of leaders were trusted, now questions stirred. Where once the circle held strong, now its edges began to fray. Children heard it in their parents' lowered voices. Elders saw it in the impatience of the young. Traders sensed it in the thinning of the markets. Warriors felt it in the way their hands gripped weapons more tightly, even within the walls. Cahokia was not yet falling, but the first shadows had lengthened across its greatness. And as those shadows spread, the city faced choices that would shape its future, whether to restore balance or to break further apart. At the heart of Cahokia, the sacred fire still burned atop the mound. Its smoke rose into the sky as it had for generations, carrying prayers upward, linking earth to heaven. Yet, in the plaza below, the people's voices no longer rose in unison as they once had. Where once ceremonies brought the city together, now they revealed its divisions. At great gatherings, some families stood silent instead of chanting, others whispered their doubts while the drums beat. A child tugged at his mother's hand, asking why the sun seemed hidden by clouds, even when the priests promised its favor. A father gave no answer, for he, too, wondered, The offerings continued. Maize laid before the flames, feathers tied to staffs, shells placed with care, but the faith behind them began to waver. Some whispered that the ancestors no longer listened, that the spirits had turned away. Others accused the leaders of failing in their sacred duties, of claiming the power of the fire, while ignoring the hunger of the people. The fire still burned, but for many, its light felt dimmer. Priests and rulers worked to restore unity. They rebuilt temples, held more frequent ceremonies, called for new feasts to remind the people of abundance. Yet the effort itself revealed the strain. Offerings grew smaller, the music less joyful, the gatherings shorter. Where once the plaza overflowed with laughter and song, now it filled with murmurs and unease. Even the great Woodhenge seemed to lose its power. When the sun rose at solstice, aligned perfectly with the cedar posts, fewer people came to watch. Some still lifted their hands in awe, but others stayed in their homes, saying, "The sun rises, whether we gather or not." What had once bound the people in wonder now struggled to hold their attention. Children still listened to the stories, but their questions grew sharper. "If the spirits watch us," one asked, "why do the floods still come?" Elders answered with patience, reminding them that the world's balance was not always easy to see. Yet even the elders carried doubt in their hearts, though they rarely spoke it aloud. The fire atop the mound still burned, but it burned against a growing wind. Its smoke drifted thinner, scattered by doubts that no drumbeat or prayer could fully silence. The circle of faith, like the circle of the city, had begun to wane, and as faith dimmed, the unity of the people dimmed with it, until even the walls of Cahokia could not hold back the tide of change. The palisade still stood, its tall posts encircling the heart of the city. Once, its sight filled the people with pride, a symbol of strength and safety. But now, to many, it seemed less like a shield and more like a burden. The cedar logs rotted in the damp earth, leaning, splitting, requiring constant replacement. Each repair demanded men's labor, women's baskets, children's help, and with every new wall raised, the people asked, "Why do we keep building when enemies are not the only storm we face?" Beyond the palisade, houses began to empty. Families quietly gathered their belongings, baskets of seeds, tools of stone, pots of clay, and moved away from the crowded streets to smaller villages beyond the reach of Cahokia's shadow. Some left for fertile fields upriver, others for hunting grounds in the forest. They carried with them the stories of their ancestors, but not always the loyalty to the city. Where once the roads leading in were crowded with newcomers, now they carried those departing, leaving silence in their place. The great mounds, once symbols of triumph, also showed signs of neglect. Weeds crept across their sides, stairs worn by countless feet began to crumble. Children still played at their bases, but fewer climbed their heights with reverence. Even the plazas felt different, still wide, still echoing with voices, but thinner, scattered, less alive than in years past. Inside the shrinking city, disputes grew sharper. Without the same abundance to share, neighbors argued over water, over land, over dwindling stores of maize. Warriors patrolled less often, their bands smaller, their presence less certain. Traders bypassed Cahokia, choosing safer or more welcoming markets elsewhere. The once roaring heart of trade and ceremony slowed to a weaker beat, and the walls, those tall cedar posts, meant to guard against outside threat, could do nothing to keep the city from hollowing within. They stood firm while the people inside slowly slipped away, like a shell left behind after the life within had moved on. Still, Cahokia endured in part, for cities do not vanish overnight. Fires still burned in homes, children still played, fields still yielded harvest. But the scale had changed. Where once tens of thousands bustled within its circle, now fewer gathered, their voices smaller against the vast silence of abandoned houses and empty fields. The fading walls became a symbol, not of safety, but of fragility, not of unity, but of a circle slowly breaking apart. And as the people drifted away, one question lingered like smoke in the air. What would become of the city that once touched the sky? The walls of Cahokia still stand in our story. But can you hear them? If you listen closely, they no longer shout of triumph. They whisper. They lean in the damp soil, creak in the wind, and remind us that nothing made by hands alone endures forever. We have walked with this city from its first seeds in the fields to its soaring greatness. We have felt the rhythm of seasons, the strength of warriors, the voices of leaders, the awe of ceremony. We have also felt the strain, the hunger of lean years, the murmurs of doubt, the cracks spreading through the circle. Now, as families drift away and the plazas grow thinner, the city enters its final chapters. And yet, pause here a moment. Do not think of this as only loss. Every city, every people, every story leaves behind echoes. Echoes in the land, in the hearts of those who move on, in the memory carried forward. The mounds still rise. The river still flows. The children who left Cahokia carried its stories to new homes, whispering them to their own children under different skies. The city's greatness did not vanish. It transformed, scattering like seeds upon the wind. So let me ask you, what do you think happens to a city when its people leave? Does it truly die? Or does it live on, in memory, in lessons, in the land itself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your voice. Join this circle. Because now, we move into the last stage of Cahokia's tale. The fires are dimmer, the plazas quieter, the walls fading. But the story is not finished. There are still echoes to follow, still voices to hear, still meaning to gather before we leave this place. And so, in the silence after greatness, we will listen for what remains, the echoes of Cahokia, carried by the wind and remembered in the earth. The city did not fall in fire and ruin, nor vanish in a single night. Instead, it faded slowly, like embers cooling after a long, bright flame. Families left their homes one by one, taking with them baskets, tools, and the memory of life in the great city. The plazas that once roared with song grew quiet. The markets where shells and copper once gleamed became still. The mounds stood watch over fields that no longer rang with children's laughter. Those who stayed did their best. They planted maize, repaired houses, kept the fires alive. But the rhythm of life no longer pulsed as it once had. Without the great gatherings, without the strength of so many voices together, the city felt hollow, its heart beating slower with each passing season. Yet silence is not emptiness. The land still held stories. The mounds rose against the sky, enduring as monuments to human hands and human hope. Even abandoned houses left traces, the faint outlines of walls and hearths, whispering of families who once shared meals, laughter, and dreams. The river still curved around the city's edge, as if cradling its memory. The people who moved on carried Cahokia with them. In new villages, they told their children of the great plazas, the high mounds, the feasts and dances where thousands once gathered. They remembered the Woodhenge, the solstice sun rising between cedar posts, the fire on the mound that burned for generations. In their stories, Cahokia lived on, not as stone and earth alone, but as memory and meaning. For in truth, no city ever truly dies. It transforms. The hands that built Cahokia's walls built new homes elsewhere. The voices that sang in its plazas sang new songs under different skies. The children who played in its streets became the elders who told stories to the next generation. What remained was not silence, but echo, and those echoes traveled far. They shaped the cultures that followed, influenced how people built, traded, prayed, and dreamed. Even centuries later, when the mounds rose quietly beneath the prairie grass, travelers who came upon them felt awe, knowing that once, here, a people had touched the sky. Cahokia was no longer the beating heart of a continent, but in silence, it became something else, a memory carried forward, a lesson in greatness and fragility, a reminder that even the mightiest cities are part of the circle of life. And so the story of Cahokia closes, not with an ending, but with a transformation. The echo of a city that still speaks. If we pause to listen, the mounds remain. Rising from the Illinois earth, they stand as green hills against the horizon. Their slopes softened by time, but their shapes unmistakable. Monk's Mound, the largest of them all, still towers above the plain. Climb its heights, and you can see the land stretch wide in every direction, just as the rulers once did. Feel the wind at the summit, and it is easy to imagine the voices of thousands below, the smoke of fires rising, the sun marking the seasons across the sky. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of Cahokia's life. Pottery shards painted with careful hands, tools of stone worn smooth by work, ornaments of shell and copper that once gleamed in the firelight. They have traced the outlines of houses, the posts of the Woodhenge, the ditches of the palisade. Each discovery adds to the story, reminding us that Cahokia was not a legend, but a living city, built by human hands with vision, labor, and hope. For native peoples, the memory is deeper still. Though the names of those who walked Cahokia streets are long gone, their descendants carry echoes of their spirit. The stories of mound builders, of ancestors who raised earth toward the heavens, still flow through oral traditions across many nations. The city belongs not only to the past, but to the living cultures who honor its legacy today. Cahokia teaches us much. It teaches the power of unity, that thousands can come together to build something that touches the sky. It teaches the fragility of greatness, that abundance must be tended with care, lest it slip away. And it teaches that nothing ever truly ends. Even when cities fade, their echoes remain, in the land, in the stories, in the lessons they leave behind. So if you ever find yourself walking across the green fields of southern Illinois, pause a moment, look up at the mounds, listen to the wind, imagine the drums, the voices, the fires, the rising sun. In that moment, you will hear Cahokia's echo, not silence, but a whisper that has lasted for centuries. For Cahokia was, and is still, the city that touched the sky. And so, dear listener, our journey through Cahokia comes to a close. We have walked the fields where maize grew tall, sat in the plazas where thousands gathered, watched the sun rise between cedar posts, and felt the power of voices that once guided a city. Together, we have seen Cahokia's greatness rise like fire in the night, and we have followed it as it faded into echoes carried on the wind. But remember, Cahokia did not vanish. Its mounds still stand, its memory still breathes, and its lessons still speak, of unity, of resilience, of how greatness can grow and how it can change. And now, you carry a part of that story with you, just as the children of Cahokia once carried it to new villages long ago. If you enjoyed this journey through history told in soft words, I invite you to stay with me for more. On my channel, there are other stories of ancient peoples, of forgotten cities, of legends and lessons waiting to be told. Each one is a path, leading you gently through the past into dreams and wonder. So, before you drift into rest, remember this: stories are fires that never go out. Each time we share them, the embers glow again. Thank you for sitting by this fire with me tonight. And until the next story, may your dreams be gentle, your sleep be deep, and your heart always open to the echoes of history.